Chapter 603. Lu Bai's name was still at the top of the second page, followed by Jun Mo, Yisu, Tang, and Qin Yan. Each of these names represented the most powerful cultivators in the world. Yi Hongyu looked at the reed hand scroll in front of her expressionlessly. She had lived in the Jishou Abbey for a period of time, but had no chance to come into contact with the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane. As such, she was still a little nervous. The way the reed hand scroll was presented made her feel the greatness of the omnipotent Haotian once again. She slowly flipped the pages and saw more familiar or unfamiliar cultivators' names appearing in front of her. One of the names made her frown slightly. It was Long Qing's name. The ink used to write Long Qing's name seemed to have been mixed with a lot of water, so the handwriting on the reed hand scroll was very faint and a little gray. The structure of the 2 characters was obviously a little unstable, as if it could break out of the paper at any time or disappear at any time. Yi Hongyu looked at Long Qing's name and shook her head. She continued to flip the pages, but after reading the reed hand scroll from beginning to end, she still could not find Ning Kei's name. She frowned and said, "Is he really dead?" The middle-aged Taoist was hanging the brush that he had washed on the brush holder, and then he adjusted the position of the brush holder to ensure that it would be exposed to enough but not too hot sunlight. After looking at it for a while, he nodded in satisfaction. "Uncle, I'm done," Yi Hongyu said. The middle-aged Taoist walked forward and closed the heavy reed hand scroll. He looked at her and shook his head. He said, "It's a pity to use such a precious opportunity to confirm whether Ning Kei is dead or alive." Yi Hongyu shook her head and said, "In my opinion, the only person in the academy who can truly threaten Haotian Taoism is Ning Quebec. So whether he is dead or alive is very important to me." The middle-aged Taoist frowned slightly and said, "Why do you say that?" Yi Hongyu said, "People say that the academy is faithless, but the people inside are still restricted by certain rules such as morality, the law of the Tang Empire, etiquette, and demeanor. Mr. First and Mr. Second are naturally great people, but the destruction they can cause can be predicted if they are restricted by these rules. Ning Kei is not restricted by any law. If he wants to do something, morality, the laws of the Tang Empire and etiquette will become meaningless to him. He will not know what demeanor is. If Ning Kei was in the position of Mr. First or Mr. Second, he would not have stopped after destroying the Buddha statue and the Lang Temple. He would have killed Qin Yan and found a way to destroy the Shenkong Temple." The middle-aged Taoist asked, "Why are you so sure of his actions?" Yi Hongyu said, "Because we are the same kind of people." The middle-aged Taoist said, "Perhaps you are right. Fortunately, Ning Kei is dead. No matter how terrible he could have become, the possibility has ended." Yi Hongyu said again, "Other than valuing Ning Kei, I am willing to choose the reed hand scroll because I do not care what I can learn from it. 2 of the 7 tomes of Arcane have been lost. Yisu read 6 of them. It would be meaningless for me to read all 5 of them, let alone 1. The middle-aged Taoist sighed and said, "After so many years, you still regard your brother as your goal." Yi Hongyu thought of the thunder by the blue lake last autumn and said coldly, "He used to be my only goal. But after last autumn, he is only a temporary goal on my path of cultivation." The middle-aged Taoist said, "Yisu should be very happy with your change." Yi Hongyu looked into the middle-aged Taoist's eyes and said, "But I am not happy, because Long Qing stole the tomes of Arcane. I really want to kill this thief but you won't let me. Why is that?" The middle-aged Taoist did not speak. Yi Hongyu said, "I used to wonder if Long Qing was the son of Yama. Since he is not, why doesn't the Divine Hall allow the judicial department to enter the wilderness to kill him? Are you raising a tiger?" The middle-aged Taoist smiled slightly and still did not speak. Yi Hongyu stared into his eyes and said, "Actually, what makes me most uneasy is what happened in the Lang Temple. Why did the Buddhism sect know that the daughter of Yama had come to the world, but our Haotian Taoism reacted so slowly? Why did the divine priest of light choose Sang Sang as his successor? Did he not see through it before he died?" The middle-aged Taoist looked at her and sighed. "I know you have doubts. But your senior brother, who can answer your doubts, is still traveling in the South Sea. I am as confused as you." Yi Hongyu walked out of the hut and came to the lake. She put her hands behind her back and her robe fluttered. She looked at the green mountain in the distance behind the Taoist temple. When she lived in the temple, she and Chin Pippi were forbidden to go near the green mountain. She did not know what was in the mountain, but she clearly felt that the mountain was dangerous. Now that she had become the great divine priest of judgment of West Hill, her state was profound. Naturally, she was not as afraid as she was when she was young. She even had a strong urge to explore it. "Do you want to know what is in the mountain?" The middle-aged Taoist walked to her side and followed her gaze to the green mountain. Yi Hongyu did not hide her thoughts. She nodded. The middle-aged Taoist said, "That green mountain is the strength of our Haotian Taoism in the past and the glory of the future." Yi Hongyu vaguely guessed something. She raised her eyebrows and asked, "When will the future come?" The middle-aged Taoist said, "Probably until the person who made our Haotian Taoism no longer strong leaves." Yi Hongyu was silent for a long time. Then she said, "No one can see how far the future is." The middle-aged Taoist said, "Everyone will grow old and die. No matter how great a person is, he can't get rid of the shackles of this rule. Only eternity is truly far in the world. So the future will not be too far. No one could live forever. That was why death seemed far away to everyone, but it was actually very close. It often came without any warning and seemed to be understated. In the autumn of the 16th year of Tianqi era, many things happened in Chang'an. But what really caught everyone's attention were the funerals that happened one after another. In winter, the old Grand Secretary Wang passed away. This veteran of 3 dynasties of the Tang Empire and a bigwig who was extremely important to the balance of the imperial court. It was said that before he died, he held the chicken soup calligraphy and looked at it for a whole night. In the end, he took back his last words of letting the chicken soup calligraphy be buried with him. Then he peacefully closed his eyes forever. The old chancellor, who had fought with Grand Secretary Wang for his whole life, also passed away before the winter snow melted. Jean Wuxia, whose eyes were red and swollen from crying, conveyed the last words of the old chancellor to the officials and students waiting in the manor. She said that since it was too troublesome to move his grave, he should be buried next to Grand Secretary Wang, which would be a good way to have fun. In the spring of the next year, Chu Xiongtu, the 16th Guard General of the Tang Empire, also passed away due to illness. Soon after, several ministers passed away. The white banners on the streets of Chang'an had no chance to be taken down. These old ministers and generals who passed away were already very old. It was normal for them to occasionally catch a cold or even grow old naturally. But because they had left for too long, half of the mainstays of the 2 dynasties in the Tianqi era had passed away in this year, which inevitably made people feel a little uneasy. What was even more unsettling was that the lung disease of the Defender General of the state Su Shi was getting worse. Even if he was forced to return to the southern front line by His Majesty, the humid air seemed to be unable to alleviate his illness as it had in previous years. And according to the news from the palace, the coughing in the imperial study was also getting lower and lower. His Majesty's temper was getting worse and worse, and the number of times he scolded an idiot was far higher than the average number of years ago. The students of the front yard of the academy graduated. Most of the foreign students returned home, and 1/3 of them stayed in Chang'an. The Tang students either joined the court or joined the army. Chu Xiongtu's grandson, Chu Zhongtian, followed his grandfather's last words and started from the basic officer of the Yulin Royal Guards. Zhong Dajuan returned to Yangguan City and immediately took over a low-ranking but extremely important official position. The Zhong family was a big family in Qinghe Prefecture. As long as he stayed in Yangguan City and did his job well, and did not make any big mistakes, he would soon be promoted again. Among these academy students, the most shocking one was Situ Ilan, the daughter of General Yun Hui and a friend of Her Highness the Princess. She actually snatched a place from the military ministry and went north to the Guxin Commandery to be a female lieutenant under Hua Shanyue's command. She had taken the first firm step towards the goal of becoming the first female general of the Tang Empire. Situ Ilan's decision shocked the whole city of Chang'an. In the beginning, people didn't understand and even mocked her, but later they became silent and respectful. People in Chang'an experienced a change in thinking, and they learned or understood something from it. Hua Shanyue was no longer the county captain, but the military supervisor of the 3 states. In the northeast hilly area of the Tang Empire, besides the northeast border military whose main camp was in Tiang City, he was the most powerful. After Xian Zhilong returned from the Lank Temple with the diplomatic corps, he was not affected by the changes in the Lank Temple. He successfully took over Xiaoho's position and became the great general of the north. And General Xu Cheng, because of his meritorious service in cooperating with the academy in dealing with the disguised horse gang of the northeast border military in the wilderness a few years ago, he took over Xian Zhilong's position and became the great general of the west, facing the Yueluan kingdom. Birth, old age, sickness and death were common, and so was the metabolism. During the Tianqi era, the old people who were like stars in the sky gradually left the world. Naturally, there would be new talents to fill the empty positions. The most powerful thing about the Tang Empire was that this land was most suitable for the growth of towering trees. However, many people had already noticed that as time passed, the new generation gradually took over, and Princess Liyu's power became more and more powerful. The only thing that could make the Empress's party feel relieved was that Ning Ke, who killed General Xiahou, had disappeared. If that person was still alive, then the Academy would definitely choose to support Liu, no matter because of his close relationship with Liu or the irreconcilable hatred between him and the Empress. These chapters are definitely mainly narration. I will try to finish the next chapter before 12:30. Now, well, I won't say anything more. It's just that I'm in a bad situation. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 604. The autumn wind caused the yellowish leaves to roll about in the courtyard. Li Qingshan raised his gaze from the fallen leaves and gazed at the walls of the imperial palace nearby. He squinted his eyes slightly and took out a white handkerchief to cover his mouth. He coughed gently before carefully folding the handkerchief and hiding it in his sleeve. He was the nation master of the Tang Empire with a high status. He was famous for being a prankster in Chang'an. However, with the increase of wrinkles, he looked older and quieter. Thinking of the old people who had passed away in the past year, Li Qingshan's eyes showed a trace of worry. Although it was natural for people to grow old and die, he still felt a little sad that so many old friends had passed away in such a short time. As the Abbey Dean of the Southern School Temple of Haotian Taoism, he could not help but worry whether this represented some kind of God's will. In the palace, the emperor seemed healthy, but in reality, his body was deteriorating with each passing year. Su Shi had aged even more in the last 2 years. If the people of his generation were still alive, then they would all be old. How could they not worry about the future of the great Tang? If the headmaster was always there, the Tang Empire would not have any problems. Even if there were some problems, they would just be some ripples in the pond. However, the headmaster would leave one day. A yellow oil paper umbrella was quietly placed on the shiny black wooden floor. He Mingqi knelt behind Li Qingshan and did not see the worried look on his teacher's face. He whispered, "The God-stunning array is related to the safety of the Tang Empire. The array I has always been kept by the Southern School Temple. Uncle Master Yen Sei passed it to Ning Ke, but senior brother Ning Ke has been missing for a long time. We should take it back and return it to His Majesty to avoid suspicion. It seems inappropriate to keep it in the academy." Li Qingshan shook his head and said, "Since senior brother passed it to Ning Ke, the academy can temporarily keep it. Remember, although we are from Taoism, we must understand the true meaning of the academy to the Tang Empire." Mingqi agreed. Li Qingshan turned around and looked at the chessboard in front of him. He reached out and gently picked up a black chess piece in the middle of the chessboard. He said, "Compared to the Lang Temple, my chess skills are extremely ordinary or even terrible. However, I am confident that I can compete with the monks in the Lang Temple in terms of understanding the way of heaven from the chessboard. One night, I once saw a horse carriage blocking the road on the chessboard. I did not know what it was, but now that I know that night was the beginning of Ning Ke's enlightenment, I can vaguely understand something. It's fine if he dies, but if he doesn't, it will really be trouble for the Tang Empire." Mingqi understood what his teacher meant. If Ning Ke and the daughter of Yama were dead, then the world would continue to move forward peacefully. If Ning Ke and the daughter of Yama were still alive, then what would the academy's attitude be? What should the great Tang do? Would he become the enemy of the entire world? Li Qingshan stared at the chessboard silently for a very long time. The fallen leaves in the courtyard were still rolling, making a rustling sound. "If I am still alive when His Majesty leaves, I will stand by Her Highness and support Prince Li Huiyuan to inherit the throne. If I die, I hope you can lead the Southern Gate Temple to do the same," Li Qingshan suddenly said. Mingqi was shocked and suddenly looked up at his teacher. Who would inherit the throne of the Tang Empire was a matter that no one dared to openly discuss in the past few years. However, as the coughing in the imperial study became deeper and more uncomfortable, there was finally such a discussion in Chang'an. However, when it came from Li Qingshan's mouth, it was completely different from the discussion in the tea house or on the street. Because in his opinion, His Majesty would not be able to hold on for too long even if he could. What shocked Mingqi even more was the teacher's choice. Everyone in the Tang Empire knew that the Empress and the Nation Master were very close. If so, why did he choose to support Li Yu and her brother? Mingqi immediately thought of the letter that Ning Ke sent back to Chang'an from Qinghe Prefecture last summer. At that time, Li Qingshan asked him to give the letter directly to Her Highness, so he became more and more confused. "Teacher, why?" He looked at Li Qingshan and asked in a daze. Li Qingshan looked at the black chess piece that he had placed in the corner of the chessboard. He was silent for a long time again until the rustling sound in the courtyard was crushed by the autumn wind. Then he said in a low voice, Because the empress is the saintess of the devil's doctrine? The empress of the Tang Empire was the saintess of the devil's doctrine? Yimingqi was so shocked by this that he fell on the cattail hassock. He looked at Li Qingshan with an expression of disbelief. Li Qingshan laughed at himself sadly and said, "Many years ago, I promised His Majesty that I would keep this secret until the grave. However, it is too unfair to the Tangs who do not know this secret." He looked at his most loyal disciple and said, "Don't doubt the truth of this matter. Even the headmaster of the academy could not cure His Majesty's old illness because of the Empress's methods." Yimingqi was so shocked that he trembled slightly and did not dare to answer. Of course, these are all in the past. They were all things that happened before they fell in love with each other. So I have always regretted that they had to pay such a high price to understand each other's feelings. Li Qingshan said slowly, "I believe that the Empress would not betray His Majesty. So does the Academy. That is why she has always been the Empress. However, what about after His Majesty's death? Li Yu and Huiyuan are not her biological children. Her son is still young. Do we really need a saintess of the devil's doctrine to lead the Tang Empire forward?" Apart from life and death, there were also old age and illness. For the officials of the imperial court, old age and illness were the best reason for them to retire, although it was often not the real reason. In the early spring of the 17th year of Tianqi era, Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library, suddenly resigned due to illness. It had been less than a month since Wang Shurchen, the Empress, lost another arm. Since then, Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary, and his wife did not come out of the mansion. It was said that the Grand Secretary and his wife spent all day in the backyard of the mansion growing flowers and weeding for fun. Their days were very leisurely. Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary, put down the flower hoe in his hand and felt a little hot. Just as he opened his clothes a little, he was hit by the slightly cold autumn wind and could not help coughing. Mrs. Zheng hurriedly helped him to sit down in the pavilion and served him hot tea. Zheng Jing looked at his wife's haggard face and could not help but sigh. He wanted to say something to comfort her, but did not know where to start. There were not many people in the autumn pavilion in the tranquil garden. The couple was drinking tea and resting in the pavilion. They sat opposite each other in silence. Mrs. Zheng suddenly burst into tears and said with a trembling voice, "How could the child in my belly be the daughter of Yama?" Hearing this, the wrinkles on Zheng Jing's face seemed to deepen and he remained silent. They were Sangsang's biological parents, so the Academy did not hide the truth about the destruction of the Lank Temple. In fact, the rumor that Sangsang was the daughter of Yama had long spread outside of the Tang Empire. Even in Chang'an there were people secretly discussing it. Zheng Jing's resignation as the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library was naturally related to this matter, but no one dared to mention it yet. Mrs. Zheng wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes and calmed herself down. She looked at him and said, "That person is still in the front hall. Do you really not want to see him?" Zheng Jing thought for a moment and said with a serious expression, "Since he came from Qinghe Prefecture to Chang'an, he will not be satisfied until he sees me. Alright, I will go and see him. I want to see what dirty thoughts they have." The middle-aged scholar who was drinking tea and waiting in the front hall of the scholar's mansion was Cui Xiu. He was a powerful figure in the Cui family of Qinghe Prefecture and had a complicated relationship with Zheng Jing. Zheng Jing looked at the scholar and thought of what happened in the past. He could not help but frown and said, "The Cui family has always been unwilling to enter Chang'an. Brother Ming Mei, why did you come all the way here?" Cui Xiu raised his eyebrows and said unhappily, "We haven't seen each other for so many years. Are you not even willing to call me brother-in-law?" Zheng Jing said, "Your sister and I separated 16 years ago. I really don't know how to call you brother-in-law." Cui Xiu restrained his anger and said indifferently, "Since you asked me why I am here, I will tell you. My sister has not remarried since she returned to Qinghe Prefecture and has always missed you. The old master wants to ask for your opinion." Zheng Jing frowned even more and said, "What do you mean?" Cui Xiu said, "The Cui family is willing to let bygones be bygones and send my sister back to reunite with you." Zheng Jing said angrily, "When I entered the imperial rankings, your Cui family instigated the censor to kidnap me to marry. I admit that I coveted the reputation of the Qinghe family, and I did want to grow old with your sister. However, I didn't know that Miss Cui was so arrogant and ruthless. It was my fault that I took a concubine, but she tried to murder my poor daughter. How could I tolerate that? Bygones are bygones and there is no possibility of reuniting them." Cui Xiu was an important figure in the Qinghe Prefecture. Even if he came to Chang'an, he was still a bigwig in the Prime Minister's mansion. He had never been humiliated like this before. He rebuked angrily, My sister knew that your daughter with that lowly servant was evil, so she wanted to kill her. You don't care about her friendship and speak like this. Don't think that you can hide everything forever. Yes, the news that your daughter is the daughter of Yama is still sealed, but the West Hill has sent news that the Divine Hall is ready to remove her title. Do you understand what this means? Zheng Jing's face was as cold as frost. When he was about to hit the table, his wife rushed out from behind the curtain and scolded with tears in her eyes, "The Cui family is full of evil." Cui Xiu did not want to argue with this woman. He stood up and casually bowed to her. He said coldly, "Judging from the situation in the court, Prince Huiyuan will ascend the throne. It does not matter whether you are there or not. This is the last chance that the old master is giving you. Since you do not want to cherish it, don't blame the Cui family for being merciless in the future." Zheng Jing said coldly, "I used to be the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library. My position in the Imperial Court was only below that of the Prime Minister. Considering the old master's temperament, if it weren't for me, he wouldn't have lowered himself to allow your sister to return home. Do the families from Qinghe County think that I don't even understand this?" Cui Xiu sneered and said, "That's all right. I just want to remind you that when the West Hill Divine Palace announces to the world, millions of Haotian believers in the world will know that your daughter is the daughter of Yama. By then, let's see if your Grand Secretary mansion can still have a moment of peace. Let's see how many people in Chang'an will come to burn your house." Zheng Jing squinted his eyes and said, "Are you threatening me?" Cui Xiu said, "What if I am?" Zheng Jing said angrily, "The families from Qinghe County are indeed lawless. How dare you threaten an imperial court official in Chang'an? Do you really think that the law of the Tang Empire does not exist?" Cui Xiu sneered and said, "The law of the Tang Empire? There are some things in the world that the law of the Tang Empire cannot control." At this moment, a voice came from outside the hall. "Can the Academy do what the law of the Tang Empire cannot control?" As I was writing, the power went out again. Luckily, I had already finished writing this chapter, so I tried to update it with high tech, but it didn't work, so I could only go on QQ and ask someone to help me talk in the book review section. I caught Butterfly Blue King, who was also staying up all night writing or playing games. I didn't even have time to post the karaoke. Thank you so much, that was too close, I almost thought I wouldn't be able to update anymore. Luckily there was a power call, I learned my lesson, I'd better get a 3G phone. By the way, is this my retribution for not wishing you a happy holiday yesterday? There's still one more chapter, but I'm going to lie down for a while. The third chapter should be out very late. Everyone can sleep first and read it tomorrow after waking up. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 605. Before he finished his sentence, Chin Pippi walked in. He looked thinner than usual, but no matter how thin he was still a fatty, especially when compared to Tang Xiaotang beside him. Cui Xiu could not help but shiver when he heard that. He was about to say something polite and leave, but Chin Pippi did not give him the chance. He grabbed his collar and shouted, "Get lost." Cui Xiu turned pale with fright. However, he soon realized something strange. The force on his neck was not strong, but the fatty's face was red, and it was obvious that he had used all his strength. So it turned out to be a scholar without the strength to truss a chicken? Naturally, he was not from the legendary second floor. At most, he was an ordinary student of the academy. As a bigwig of the Cui family in Qinghe County, Cui Xiu was not afraid of an ordinary student of the academy. He was ashamed and angry when he thought of his previous fear. He shouted, "How dare you? How dare you commit violence? Guards!" The door of the scholar's mansion opened to welcome Chin Pippi and Tang Xiaotang. Before the door was closed, the stewards and servants of the Cui family who were waiting on the street outside the mansion, heard their masters scolding and rushed in. Chin Pippi found that he could not move them and could not help but feel ashamed. He let go of his hand awkwardly and looked back at Tang Xiaotang. He said, "I don't want to lower myself to their level." Tang Xiaotang sighed and turned to the fierce stewards and servants. She rolled up her sleeves and said, "I can't do all the physical work in the future, can I?" A series of clear sounds rang out in the courtyard. The stewards and servants of the Cui family, who had rushed into the scholar's mansion, did not even realize what was happening before they were knocked to the ground and cried out in pain. The goal of the girl from the Devil's Doctrine was to become the strongest woman in the world. It did not take much effort to deal with these stewards and servants. It was clean and neat and could even be described as refreshing. Cui Xiu's expression changed when he saw his servants with broken legs and bleeding in pain. He knew that something was wrong and was about to reveal his identity. However, he did not expect Tang Xiaotang to be more decisive than Qin Pipi. She grabbed his neck and threw him out of the mansion's wall like a chick. Cui Xiu's body flew over the wall and landed on the ground. He didn't know which leg of his was broken, but he almost fainted from the pain. Then Tang Xiaotang threw all the people who had rushed into the scholar's mansion out. However, the stewards and servants did not receive the same treatment as Cui Xiu. Instead, she kicked them out of the wall like stones. There were sounds of air being pierced and there were screams and bangs. Qin Pipi was envious when he saw Tang Xiaotang kicking people like stones. He wished he could change to the devil's doctrine. But he was also a little afraid of the future. He had mixed feelings. Zheng Jing and his wife looked at the scene in front of them and could not help but shake their heads and smile bitterly. They knew that their daughter and Ning Kei's son-in-law were not ordinary people, but they did not expect that this young and adorable girl would have such great strength and be so decisive. Mr. 12, thank you for taking care of us for the past year, Zheng Jing said to Qin Pipi gratefully. At this moment, Qin Pipi was ashamed of his inferiority. He did not dare to accept Zheng Jing's words as he usually did. He waved his hands and said, "When Ning Kei was in the wilderness, I was responsible for taking care of Sang Sang. Now I don't know where they are playing, so I will take care of you too. But I will leave Chang'an for a while, so I brought my niece here. She will take care of everything in the mansion in the future. As you can see, she is much stronger than me and she is very close to Sang Sang. You don't have to be so polite." Zheng Jing was a little surprised. He thought that the sublime people on the second floor of the academy rarely left the mountain, so why did Mr. 12 have to travel so far away? He asked Qin Pipi a few questions, but Qin Pipi just answered casually and did not want to explain in detail. The people of the Cui family from Qinghe Prefecture were kicked out of the Grand Secretary's mansion by Tang Xiaotang. Logically, they should have helped each other or left in a carriage to treat their injuries. But Tang Xiaotang's methods were not so simple. Several guards who were famous for their bravery tried several times but could not stand up. Their faces were extremely pale from the pain. The Grand Secretary's mansion was located in the noble area of the North City. The people who lived on both sides of the street were either high-ranking officials or nobles. It had always been quiet and solemn. Suddenly, there were more than a dozen injured people screaming on the street, which shocked many people. Someone sent a message to the Chang'an local government, asking the local government to send someone to see what had happened. If it was an ordinary street fight, the Chang'an local government would at most send a supervisor. But when he heard that it was related to the Grand Secretary's mansion, Shengguan Yangyu's triangular eyes suddenly narrowed. As the prefectural magistrate of Chang'an City, he certainly knew which bigwig lived in that mansion. The Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library, even though he had resigned more than half a year ago, was not someone he could take lightly. So he had to go there himself. When he arrived at the gate of the Grand Secretary's mansion, Shengguan Yangyu suddenly felt very regretful when he found out that the injured people were from the Cui family from Qinghe Prefecture. He thought that if he had known this earlier, he would have used the excuse of being seriously ill or escaping the death of his mother. How could he be stuck between the big families of Qinghe Prefecture and the Grand Secretary, Zheng Jing? The position of prefectural magistrate of Chang'an City was extremely important and difficult. Shengguan Yangyu had been able to sit in the position for so many years and had so much money in his hands. He relied on the 4 words slippery hands and smoothing things over. Seeing that he could not get out of this situation, he began to think about how to smooth things over today. He first sent his subordinates to help Cui Xiu into the carriage for treatment, and then prepared to enter the mansion to ask for some mercy from the Grand Secretary. Just then, Zheng Jing sent Qin Pipi and Tang Xiaotang out of the mansion, and they met at the gate of the mansion. Shengguan Yangyu looked at the handsome fat man and suddenly felt a chill in his heart. He remembered the case of the handmaiden of the old brush pen shop harboring a fugitive 2 years ago in the Chang'an local government. That year, Lord Shengguan first used illness as an excuse, and then knocked himself unconscious with a stick to get out of this case. It was not until a long time later that he knew that the handmaiden of Mr. 13 of the academy was actually the separated daughter of the Grand Secretary, Zheng Jing. And it was a fat man from the academy who took the handmaiden away in front of Zhuge Warren and Wang Jinglu of the Imperial Center Administration in the Chang'an local government. Shengguan Yangyu felt cold all over, and thought that it was fortunate that he did not have time to smooth things over. He first bowed to Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary, and then suddenly turned around and sternly scolded his subordinates. "What are you still doing? Hurry up and bring these bad people back." The yamen runners and constables of the local government were instantly dumbfounded, thinking that when had their lord been so righteous? Even if the Grand Secretary was not someone to be trifled with, This was the Chui family of Qinghe County, and his attitude was extremely gentle before. Although they were cursing in their hearts, there was no reason not to obey the Lord's order. A yamen runner walked forward and pulled Chui Xiu off the carriage. He took out the iron chain and was about to tie him up. Chui Xiu was shocked and speechless. He thought that the prefectural magistrate's expression was extremely gentle when he revealed his identity. Why did he suddenly change his attitude? Qin Pipi looked simple and honest, but in fact he had a crystal heart. How could he not understand Shangguan Yangyu's meaning? He nodded with satisfaction and said, "Lock these people up. They are not allowed to come out until I return to Chang'an." Tang Xiaotang glanced at him and thought that he might be gone for 2 or 3 years on this long journey. Did he want the Chang'an local government to lock these people up for 2 or 3 years? Chui Xiu understood at this time that he had really met a big shot, and that the other party was very likely to be a teacher from the second floor of the academy. He did not want to be taken advantage of and said repeatedly, "It's a misunderstanding, it's a misunderstanding. I guess you don't know that I'm—" He had thought that even if the other party was from the second floor of the academy, he would not humiliate the Qinghe County families that had been passed down for thousands of years if he revealed his family background in front of so many people. However, he did not expect that Qin Pipi did not even bother to listen to him. He waved his hand and said, "Youngest brother once said in the letter that there are a bunch of idiots in Qinghe County. Do I have any interest in knowing?" Chui Xiu only felt a tightness in his chest, and the pain in his foot seemed to have suddenly intensified. His face turned pale. Shangguan Yangyu stood beside Qin Pipi and stroked his 3 strands of messy beard. He said awkwardly, "The laws of the Tang Empire are ironclad and cannot be violated. How can the academy be an exception? The Chang'an local government can't lock people up at will." Qin Pipi knew that he was a smart person, but he did not have time to play tricks. He said, "Breaking into the mansion and attempting to murder an imperial court official, you can just find any law to use. Don't tell me you don't know how to do it." Shangguan Yangyu almost pulled his beard off. He said with a bitter smile, "If I filter it carefully, I might filter out more than a dozen crimes. I don't know which one to use." Qin Pipi asked, "What's the severity?" Shangguan Yangyu was a scoundrel, despicable and vulgar, but he did have some ability. He said casually, "Attempting to murder an imperial court official, even if he failed, he should be beheaded or banished for 3,000 miles. If he is accused of breaking into a private house, the heaviest punishment is imprisonment in the mine for 3 years. If he is accused of framing," Qin Pipi's eyes brightened when he heard 3 years in the mine. He said, "This is good." Shangguan Yangyu said helplessly, "But the Grand Secretary's mansion is not a private house." Grand Secretary Zheng Jing, who had been silent at the side, looked at Chui Xiu, who was sitting on the ground beside the carriage with a pale face. He gradually felt happy, but his face was still expressionless. He suddenly said, "I have already resigned, so naturally it is a private house." Shangguan Yangyu's expression didn't change, but his heart was in turmoil. He thought to himself that the Grand Secretary was known for his simple life and gentle temperament, but he didn't expect that he would stab someone in the waist with just a few words. It was really amazing. It seemed that he was not thick-skinned enough and acted too rigidly and mechanically. If he wanted to continue to climb up, he had to learn more from these old officials. Not to mention the prefectural magistrate's knowledge of officialdom, Chui Xiu knew that the 3 people in front of the mansion had casually sentenced him with a few words. He couldn't help but turn pale. He knew that with his identity he would definitely not be sent to the mine, but his followers might not be able to escape this fate. 3 chapters completed. Oh yeah, I write such a chapter occasionally and then I realize what my favorite is. I have recommended it to everyone in YY, and now I strongly recommend it again. Struggling in the New Ming Dynasty. I like this book very much. I don't know the author, so I recommend it as a friend. Yes, it's Monday. Please support me with your recommendation tickets. If you still have monthly tickets, please throw them to me. Thank you very much. I will still write 3 chapters tomorrow and I will work hard to write. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 606. In the south of Chang'an, the autumn wind was chilly and there were few travelers. The sun shone through the clouds, clear as water, without any warmth. Qin Pipi and Tang Xiaotang were saying their goodbyes in the pavilion beside the road. Ning Kei is missing or dead. Anyway, there is no one from the academy to enter the human realm. Now that the situation is tense, the academy needs to establish its power. Since the idiots from Qinghe County have come to us, there is no reason not to make use of them. Apart from you, I am the last one. I have to do something before I leave. You also know that the situation is tense now. Although the academy is not afraid, it does not want the world to be in chaos. Why do you insist on leaving at this moment? Chin Pippi looked at the girl's beautiful face and said, things between us still need to be decided by the elders in the family. I want to know my father's attitude on this matter. After knowing that Chin Pippi's father was the legendary bigwig, Tang Xiaotang felt extremely complicated. However, she had already calmed down and asked, what if your father does not agree? The Jishou Abbey's Abbey Dean's son wanted to marry a girl from the Devil's Doctrine. No matter how one looked at it, it seemed that this matter would eventually come to a tragic end. Chin Pippi said, I asked for his opinion because I respect my father as a son. Since the teacher did not object to us being together, then it does not matter whether he agrees or not. If he disagrees, I will come back. Will he imprison me? Or does he want to be beaten by the teacher again? Tang Xiaotang smiled and said, how can he laugh at his own father like this? Chin Pippi smiled and said, isn't there one in front of you? Tang Xiaotang asked again, are you going to the South Sea directly or go to the Jishou Abbey first? Chin Pippi's smile faded and he said seriously, I will go to the Jishou Abbey first and then find a chance to go to the West Hill Divine Palace to figure out what happened in the Lank Temple last year. Also, the West Hill Divine Palace seems to be ready to reveal Song Song's identity. If this really happens, even if Ning Ke and Sang Sang reappear in the world, they will face endless pursuit. I want to see if I can buy some time. Tang Xiaotang nodded and said, when will you come back? The sky suddenly darkened and a cold wind blew. Gradually raindrops fell. Chin Pippi looked at the autumn rain outside the pavilion and said, I will come back before the first spring rain next year. Take care on the road, said Tang Xiaotang. Chin Pippi said, if Ning Ke comes back, remember to inform me. How do I inform you? Tang Xiaotang asked. Chin Pippi said, just look for the Southern Gate Temple. They are the fastest to contact Haoyan Taoism. Tang Xiaotang nodded and said, then take care. Chin Pippi turned around and walked out of the pavilion. Just as he was about to step into the rain, he suddenly turned back. Tang Xiaotang looked at him and said with a smile, can this little rain make you sick? Chin Pippi looked at her seriously and said, the rain can't make me sick, but lovesickness can make me sick. Hearing this, Tang Xiaotang blushed and began to roll up her sleeves out of habit. Chin Pippi was startled and said, you told me to take care of myself twice. It seems that you really want me to leave? Tang Xiaotang bit her lower lip and refused to speak. Chin Pippi was about to leave, but he still felt reluctant. He plucked up his courage and walked up to her and held her in his arms. With the young girl in his arms, he didn't feel very proud or intoxicated. His heart was anxious, and he was constantly paying attention to her two hands. He found that although the young girl's hands were clenched very tightly and were slightly trembling, she didn't seem to have any signs of making a move. He couldn't help but feel a little relieved, so he hugged her even tighter and then lowered his head. After an unknown amount of time, the two figures in the departure pavilion gradually separated. Chin Pippi walked into the rain heroically and waved goodbye without looking back. In the pavilion, Tang Xiaotang looked at his broad back and also waved, her cheeks still blushing. At this time, the autumn wind was blowing, but it was unknown whether her slightly messy hair and mood were disturbed by the annoying autumn wind or by that person. Some people left Chang'an and naturally some people returned. Not long after Chin Pippi and Tang Xiaotang parted at the pavilion, a couple holding green paper umbrellas walked into the pavilion in the patter of autumn rain. The wife was a delicate girl with a gentle expression and a satisfied look. She looked at the majestic city of Chang'an in the rain a few miles away and was shocked. She whispered, "It's so high." Her husband was a middle-aged man who smiled at her words. He wore a green robe and looked gentle and elegant. His gestures were free and easy. If he did not carry a little girl on his back, who knew how many girls in Chang'an would be attracted to him? The little girl was about 2 years old. Her little hands tightly grasped the clothes of the middle-aged man and tried to raise her head to look at the city wall in the distance. Her eyes were black and white as if they were painted. They rolled around and looked particularly lively. The autumn rain temporarily stopped. The middle-aged man took his wife, carried his daughter on his back, and carried his simple luggage out of the farewell pavilion. They walked toward the south gate of Chang'an. As he approached, his footsteps did not change, but they seemed to be much lighter. It was quiet at the south gate, but it was not that there were no people. On the contrary, there were many people at the city gate today. There were officers in armor, officials in shoe clothes, and several hundred green-skinned men in green clothes and shoes who were obviously not good people. There was even a eunuch. Looking at the gate, the middle-aged man did not stop but shook his head helplessly. His wife was born in the countryside. Although she had lived in the capital of the Great River Kingdom for 2 years and gained some knowledge, she had never seen such a big battle array. She could not help but feel a little frightened and subconsciously reached out to grab his sleeve. Looking at the family of 3 walking towards the city gate, the crowd gradually became restless. Even some of the men in black clothes had tears in their eyes. A man wearing the official uniform of the commander of the Valiant Cavalry Battalion took the lead and bowed down, followed by countless people, but their voices were not the same. "Welcome, Grand Master. Welcome, Big Brother. Second Brother Chow. Mr. Spring Breeze Pavilion, come with me to the palace. His Majesty has been waiting for you." The family of 3 who returned to Chang'an in the autumn rain were Chow Xiaoshu of Spring Breeze Pavilion, his wife and daughter. He had planned to return to Chang'an with his family last autumn, but his daughter, Little Pumpkin, suddenly fell seriously ill and the doctor told her not to be tired, so he delayed his return to this autumn. Chow Xiaoshu did not follow Eunuch Lin to the palace. After meeting with his brothers, he directly went to the East City's Spring Breeze Pavilion horizontal 2nd Street. As the saying goes, filial piety comes first. Eunuch Lin could only sigh helplessly and feel sorry for His Majesty. The group of people entered the old house of Spring Breeze Pavilion. Old Master Chow was too lazy to talk with his unfilial son. He carried his granddaughter and went to the backyard to pick autumn fruits to eat. As for Chow Xiaoshu's wife, Linzi, she hadn't recovered from today's repeated shocks before she was invited to the backyard by several women. Looking at his brothers in the hall, Chow Xiaoshu found that they had not suffered any pain or disaster in the past few years. He could not help but feel comforted. After a long separation, they naturally drank together and the scene was very lively. However, he noticed that one person at the table seemed to be a little silent. That person was the most trusted think tank, Qin 7. Chow Xiaoshu knew that Qin Vi's silence often represented some very difficult things, but he did not intend to discuss those things tonight, or even that thing at all. He quietly looked at the wine cup in his hand and suddenly asked, "Is the old brush pen shop still there?" As soon as this question came out, the table suddenly became very quiet. Chang San and others looked at Qin 7, but Mr. Qi shook his head as if he had a different view on some things. Qin 7 knew that the question was directed at him, so he gently turned the wine cup and said, "The rental contracts of all the houses on Lin 47th Street have arrived. It will not be too glaring if they are all taken back." Chow Xiaoshu calmly said, "I don't care about other shops, but I rented the old brush pen shop to him. If he doesn't come back, then he will continue renting it. No one can think about taking it back." Mr. Qi finally had a chance to interrupt. He said, "The dividends of the gambling house in the western city have always been calculated, and we have saved it for Mr. 13. The house by Yanming Lake has always been looked after by our brothers." Chow Xiaoshu nodded. Qin 7 put down the wine cup in his hand, looked at Chow Xiaoshu and said, "If the rumor is true. In fact, I am 90% sure that the rumor is true. We should take advantage of the fact that no one is paying attention to it. We don't owe Ning Ke anything, and there is no reason for everyone to be implicated because of him. Lao Chi, you have always been the one with the best brains among all of us. Whether it was the lawsuit with the Ministry of Revenue or the conflict with the military ministry, it was all thanks to your advice. His Majesty has always appreciated you. If it were not for the criminal record, perhaps you would have already entered the military ministry. Your thinking is not wrong. The words of an experienced and prudent person always make sense at any time and in any place." Chow Xiaoshu raised his wine cup and toasted Qin 7, and then slowly drank it up. Qin Qi sighed. He knew second brother Chow's temperament very well. Once he started talking like that, it was tantamount to saying that there was no turning back. He picked up the wine cup and drank it in one gulp. He felt a bit bitter. As expected, Chow Xiaoshu continued, "But Lin 47th Street is not the public property of the gang. It is my private property, so I want to maintain the status quo for the time being." Looking at his most respected brother, Qin 7 was still a little unwilling. He said anxiously, "This matter is too big. Not to mention the Fish Dragon Gang, even the Imperial Court and the Academy can't handle it." Chow Xiaoshu put down the wine cup and calmly said, "There are some things in the world that have nothing to do with whether they can handle it or not, but whether they should handle it or not. On that rainy spring night, I invited Ning Ke to go to the Spring Breeze Pavilion with me in front of the old brush pen shop to kill people. He didn't ask me who I was, so now I don't want to know who he is." Ning Ke and Sang Sang had been missing for a whole year. No one knew where they had gone. It was as if they had disappeared into thin air. Logically speaking, the two of them should be dead, and the prefectural magistrate of Chang and had already issued a death certificate. However, in fact, many people believed that they were not dead. Some people didn't believe that Ning Kai and Sang Sang were dead because their bodies were not found in the Lank Temple. Some people didn't believe it because they didn't want Ning Kai and Sang Sang to die. However, no matter which one it was, no one could find or even guess where they were now if they were not dead. Even the headmaster didn't know where Ning Kai and Sang Sang were now if they were not dead. On the precipice of the back mountain of the academy, the headmaster was enjoying chrysanthemums, eating crabs and drinking yellow wine. Although the chrysanthemums were far away in the mountains in the south of Chang'an, he could still see them clearly. If there is another world or another space in the chessboard, then Ning Kai and Sang Sang would naturally be destroyed if the chessboard was destroyed. If Qin Yan had successfully accelerated the flow of time in the chessboard, then 1 year in the human world would have been 3 lifetimes for the 2 poor guys in the chessboard. The headmaster picked up the warm wine pot and took a sip. He said, "Either way, it doesn't seem to be a good result. However, the good news is that I don't think anyone can destroy the chessboard. You know, it is something that Buddha left for the monks in the Shenkong temple to save their lives. I also don't think that Qin Yan has the ability to accelerate the flow of time in the chessboard world to the extent of turning the chessboard over. Therefore, they should still be alive and haven't been in there for a long time. We just have to see when they can come out." Jun Mo knelt beside the headmaster and was using a set of very complicated tools to cut the crab meat for the headmaster. He said, "According to what the calligraphy addict told Qishan, only you can open the chessboard. The problem is that we don't even know where the chessboard is." The headmaster said, "The chessboard is in the chessboard." Jun Mo immediately understood the meaning of this sentence. He slightly raised his eyebrows and said, "Isn't this a cycle of death?" The headmaster shook his head and said, "Since it is a cycle, it will naturally grow and multiply. How can it be a death? The chessboard itself will break this doom. I just don't know how long Qishan will stay." Jun Mo said, "The West Hill Divine Palace will announce to the world 3 days later. The edict has already been sent here. It states that Sang Sang is the daughter of Yama and the followers of Haotian are to be hunted down and killed. They even released a portrait. However, the academy and youngest brother are not mentioned in the edict." After a short pause, he continued, "Eldest brother has been looking for youngest brother and Sang Sang in the world for a whole year. I don't know if he can find them, or if he can find them before the Buddhism and Taoism sects." The headmaster looked up at the drizzling autumn sky and said, "If those Taoist priests and monks can really find Ning Kai and Sang Sang before your senior brother, then this is really God's will." At this time Jun Mo had already peeled a lake crab. He placed it on a plate and respectfully handed it to the headmaster. The headmaster looked at the crab that looked as good as before. In fact, the crab's shell and flesh had been peeled off, and even the smallest piece of flesh had been peeled off. He said, "The fun of eating crab is to do it yourself. Whether chewing or peeling, what fun is there in this situation?" In the autumn of last year, a scholar left the Lank Temple and then appeared in the field deep in the west of the wilderness. In front of him were hundreds of monks with profound dharma. Those monks looked at the gentle and dusty scholar as if they were facing a formidable enemy. A voice that could only be described as magnificent sounded in the field. The voice first chanted the name of Buddha and then indifferently asked, "Mr. First, what brings you to our Shenkong temple?" Eldest brother replied, "Greetings, chief preaching monk. I want to know if you have seen my youngest brother." In the following 3 days, the bell in the Shenkong temple rang loudly and the light of Buddha shone brightly. There seemed to be a wind blowing in the temple. The scholar found nothing and left. In the spring of this year, the scholar visited the 72 temples of the Ueluan kingdom. Every time he went to a temple, he would take out a portrait and ask the monks in the temple, "Have you seen my youngest brother and this little girl?" In the summer, the scholar visited the Taoist temple of the Song kingdom and found nothing. In autumn, the scholar returned to the Lank temple and asked the abbot of the Lank temple, Monk Guan Hai, to mobilize more than 1,000 workers to dig up a few huge rocks in the back of the temple. Then he stood in the ruins and looked at the broken well and ruins for a long time. He always felt that it was his responsibility not to know whether his youngest brother was alive or not. After a while he came to a very shabby Taoist temple and knocked on the door politely. He took out the wrinkled portrait and looked at the old Taoist in the temple. He coughed uncomfortably and then asked in a slightly hoarse voice, "If you come from the Tile Mountain town, have you seen these 2 people?" The old Taoist had no idea what he was talking about and did not understand how the scholar knew that he came from the Tile Mountain town. He shook his head in confusion. There was no disappointment on the scholar's face. He calmly said goodbye to the old Taoist and turned to leave the Taoist temple. He went to the next place. From autumn to autumn, for more than 300 days a year, the eldest brother of the academy searched for the traces of Ning Ke and Sang Sang in the world. He went to 400 Buddhist temples, 2,100 Taoist temples, 47 cities, and traveled all over the mountains and seas. He was tired and haggard and covered with dust, but he never stopped. The autumn rain fell on Chang'an. A cat was lying on the wall of the old brush pen shop. It was wet all over and screamed at the sky. Then it jumped into the small courtyard and walked into the bedroom with familiarity. It lay down on the bed and wiped the rain off its body with the quilt. This small courtyard had been uninhabited for a long time. The hateful young man who liked to hit it with stones had died somewhere. Therefore, the cat felt that its current life was very happy. It slept sweetly on the dusty quilt. It slept on its stomach, on its back, with its tail between its legs, holding its tail, or with its 4 feet facing the sky. It changed countless positions and slept for many days. Finally, it felt a little bored. The cat bent its 2 front legs and put its head on its soft paws. It looked at the door with its head slightly tilted. It suddenly felt a little lonely and even began to expect to hear the sound of someone pushing the door open. The servants in the house by the Yanming Lake had either been dismissed or returned to the Grand Secretary's mansion. There was no light in the whole house, making it seem particularly deserted. The lotus leaves in the lake were withered and swayed slightly in the autumn rain. No one knew if any of the lotus leaves still remembered the thunder and the things that happened in the past. A cold sun hung over the wasteland. The yellow grass was covered with frost. Even if 2 finger-sized small fish trapped in the pond wanted to help each other, the foam that they spat out would be frozen into ice in a very short time. Suddenly, the shallow pond became deeper. The wheels roared past. A black carriage rushed out of the air with a violent momentum and landed heavily on the slightly hard ground of the wilderness. It continued to rush forward at an amazing speed, as if it wanted to catch up with the distant sun. This chapter has 5,000 words. I don't know when I can write the next chapter. Don't wait for me. Go to bed early. I will continue to write. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 607. There were flowers in the 4 seasons of the world. Even in winter there were plum blossoms. Naturally, there were also flowers in autumn. The Lank Temple was most famous for its osmanthus flowers in autumn. Ning Ke held Sang Sang, who was covered in blood. For some reason, he thought of the osmanthus flowers beside the lone grave in the pagoda forest before he died. At this moment, the sword that came from the sky was very close to the black horse carriage. It would probably stab Sang Sang and him in the next moment. In fact, he did not really see the flying sword, but he sensed it and was sure that it was from the Sage of Sword Lu Bai. He knew that he and Sang Sang were about to die, so he did not do anything else. He only hugged Sang Sang tighter and waited quietly. However, what happened next was completely beyond Ning Ke's imagination and calculation. The sword that came from the sky and was supposed to kill the 2 of them actually flew past the black horse carriage. The quiet light of Buddha faded behind the horse carriage. The dilapidated scene in the back temple of the Lank Temple and the autumn rain were all isolated outside and then disappeared without a trace. It was quiet all around. Ning Ke knew that the horse carriage had completely entered the world in the chessboard. His extremely tense mind suddenly relaxed. Sweat poured out like a storm and instantly drenched his body. The big black horse also felt the changes in the surrounding environment. It neighed happily and galloped on the quiet road. However, before it could run more than 10 feet, the seemingly deep and endless road suddenly broke in the middle. The road was originally on a high mountain in the chessboard world. The sudden collapse in front of it naturally turned it into a cliff. Having just escaped from a desperate situation, it did not expect to face such danger in such a short time. The big black horse did not even have time to stop. Its violent temper flared up in the moment of despair and it actually rushed down while neighing wildly. With a heavy crash, the black horse carriage landed heavily on the ground. The wheels crushed a puddle that was about to freeze. Then, it rolled over the slightly hardened and cold ground and continued galloping towards the cold sun in the distance. The violent impact bounced Ning Ke up in the carriage. His head hit the carriage board heavily, and the pain made him wake up from the confusion caused by the unexpected change. He subconsciously looked out of the window, only to see a stretch of desolation. The field was dark and silent, and there were a few withered trees occasionally. This was not the Lank Temple, but it was also not the world in the chessboard. The white grass with the color of frost had long died, and the fish in the puddles must have long been frozen. It was still autumn. The scenery looked familiar to him, but he had never been here before. What was this place? Was this a wasteland? But a moment ago, the black horse carriage was still in front of the back temple of Lank Temple. Why did it appear in the wilderness the next moment? The Lank Temple was located in the southeast territorial sea. The closest distance to the wilderness was more than 1,000 miles. What had happened? Why were we here? Ning Ke looked at the scenery of the wilderness outside the window and was shocked speechless. Then he came to his senses and anxiously looked at Sang Sang in his arms. Although the little girl was still very weak, her life should not be in danger. He could not help but gasp heavily and wave his fist forcefully. As long as Sang Sang was still alive, as long as this was not the Lank Temple, as long as there was no light of Buddha shrouding the horse carriage, he would not care even if they were in the underworld, let alone traversing thousands of miles to the wilderness. After galloping for a distance, the big black horse woke up from the violent emotions that had erupted before its death. It slowly stopped and turned its head to look around in alarm. After confirming that this was not the Lank Temple and that it had not fallen to its death under the damned cliff, it began to pant with lingering fear. Sang Sang woke up and struggled to open her eyes. Looking at the sky outside the window, she found that she was not dead, and neither was Ning Quebec. She could not help but feel a little confused and asked, "Where is this?" Ning Ke held her close to the window and looked out. After thinking silently for a moment, he remembered an illusion that Master Qishan had told him a few days ago and vaguely guessed the truth. However, even though he had seen it with his own eyes, he still found it hard to believe what he had encountered. "If I'm not wrong, we should be in the western wilderness now," he said. Hearing his answer, Sang Sang's nose turned sour. She said sadly, "The western wilderness and the Tile Mountain have to cross the entire continent. It is so far away. How can we arrive in the blink of an eye? Are we already dead? Is this the underworld? We are already dead. Ning Ke, why do you still like to lie to me?" Ning Ke wiped the tears off her pale little face and coaxed, "If you are really dead, it doesn't matter if I lie to you. When did I lie to you about anything when you were not dead? This is really the western wilderness." Sang Sang felt a little better and forced herself to sit up in his arms. Looking out of the window, she found that it was really like the wilderness that she and Ning Ke were familiar with. She could not help but be surprised. "A few days ago, Master Qishan told me a story about the Lank Temple." Ning Ke said thoughtfully, "It is said that when Buddha cultivated in the Tile Mountain, he once sensed that there was a place at the foot of the mountain that was vaguely connected to the Shenkong Temple. So he ordered his disciples to build the Lank Temple there. Later, Buddha comprehended the supreme dharma of space passage and built a simple stone pagoda there, which could allow monks to directly reach the far west Pure Land. I asked the master if the formation was still there. The master said that after tens of thousands of years, the manna left by the Buddha had disappeared without a trace. The stone pagoda had also turned into ashes. The monks in the temple built a Buddhist temple on the location of the stone pagoda. It was the Buddhist temple that we were sitting in before." Sang Sang could not believe this explanation. She widened her eyes and asked, "Are you saying that when the master opened the world of the chessboard, he also opened the array of the stone pagoda left by Buddha? So he sent us here?" Ning Ke shook his head and said, "Since the master thought that the space array left by Buddha had lost its effect, then he definitely did not open it. Perhaps something happened in the Lank Temple after the horse carriage entered the chessboard. But we have no way of knowing now. It must have been a big commotion." The array of the stone pagoda deep in the foundation of the Buddha hall in the back temple of the Lank Temple had been buried for many years. The power left by Buddha had indeed almost completely disappeared. However, the monks in the temple had been chanting and worshipping Buddha for countless years. Under the influence of the Buddha's nature, the stone pagoda still retained the last bit of power. Ning Ke did not know what happened in the Lank Temple after the black horse carriage entered the chessboard. But his guess was right. The commotion that could reopen the array left by Buddha was naturally not small. At that moment, the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect, Qinyan, broke his 16-year silent meditation and wanted to forcefully reverse the rules of the chessboard world. Second brother, Jun Mo, threw out the iron sword with all his power. The silent meditation of the Buddhism sect and the iron sword of the academy were the most powerful techniques in the cultivation world. But if there was only one of them, it would not be enough to open the array. But when the two overlapped, a very magical change occurred. The power of Buddha hidden in the broken well was activated, and the array in the stone pagoda was reopened. Perhaps because the chessboard was also a relic of Buddha, the array automatically sent the chessboard to the western wilderness. So when the black horse carriage rushed out of the chessboard world, it naturally landed in the wilderness. There is one more thing that I do not understand. Why can we rush out of the chessboard world on our own? Ning Ke was very puzzled. Sang Sang had already believed this magical experience. Because of this, she thought of something else. Her face turned pale and she said, if that array is connected to the Lang Temple and the Shenkong Temple, then we are now. Ning Ke looked at the Bodhi tree with gray bark and futon leaves in the distance. He said with a serious expression, yes, we should be very close to the Shenkong Temple now. The big black horse was in the ecstasy of surviving a disaster. It kicked its front hooves lightly and pulled up the slightly black soil. It wanted to see if it could find some good things like the yellow fruit of the goblin to reward itself. Suddenly, it heard the sound coming from the carriage. Its ears suddenly stood up in fear and its body became extremely stiff. Because of the previous encounter in the Lang Temple, it had a deep impression of the monk in the cotton kasaya. It should be said that it was extremely afraid of him. And that monk was from the Shenkong Temple. In its view, any monk from the Shenkong Temple was so terrifying. Now that he had come to the Shenkong Temple, it was no different from courting death. The big black horse forcibly suppressed the fear in its heart and did not dare to neigh. It stealthily turned around and prepared to escape in the direction from which it came. However, when it turned around, it was shocked to find that the scenery in all four directions was almost the same. It did not know where the Shenkong Temple was. Where should it escape to? Ning Ke carefully placed Sang Sang on the bedding and walked out of the carriage. He stood on the shaft of the carriage and covered his eyes with his hand. He looked up at the sky seriously for a long time and did not say anything. The big black horse was extremely anxious. It thought, how can you still be in the mood to look up at the starry sky at a time like this? Look at the cold sun. It is obviously morning. Where are the stars? Why can't I see anything? Ning Ke was a little confused. Could it be that the array does not lead to the Shenkong Temple? But there is clearly something wrong with the Bodhi tree. The big black horse's eyes brightened. It thought that Ning Ke was indeed worthy of his master. He could actually think that the Shenkong Temple must be on the mythical floating island. Then as long as he looked up at the sky he would not have to worry, would he? Ning Ke saw a very small mound in the distance. He could vaguely see some green on it. He gently kicked the big black horse's rump and motioned it to go there and see what was there. The big black horse twisted its rump angrily. It was not that it was dissatisfied with being kicked by Ning Quebec. It was something that it had long been used to, but it felt that Ning Ke's decision was a little hasty. In a place like the wilderness, as long as there was green there must be danger. It was said that Ning Ke had killed the horse gang in the wilderness. Didn't he know that? Ning Ke knew what the silly horse was thinking. He said angrily, do you think that the Shenkong Temple is on that mound? Such a small mound cannot even put an incense burner. How about you make a Buddhist temple out of it? The big black horse thought that Ning Ke's words made sense. It was probably confused by fear. This guy was indeed worthy of being its master. He could still be so calm after escaping from death. The wheels rolled and the black horse carriage moved toward the green mound in the distance. In the beginning Ning Ke's expression was still very calm. However, gradually his expression became more and more solemn. That was because he found something very strange. With the speed of the big black horse the mound seemed to be very far. In fact, it should not take long to reach it. However, after a while the mound still seemed to be far away. Ning Ke gradually became vigilant. He lifted the curtain and was ready to stop the big black horse. The big black horse had already stopped. Its eyes were full of fear and its thick lips were tightly shut. It did not dare to show even one of its big white teeth that it was proud of. It did not dare to breathe at this time. Ning Ke saw the scene in front of the horse carriage. His body suddenly stiffened and he was so shocked that he could not breathe. The wilderness suddenly sank 100 feet in front of the black horse carriage, forming a steep cliff. Because the terrain of the wilderness was extremely flat, it could not be seen before. It was only when they walked in front of the cliff that they discovered it. It was indeed very strange that a cliff suddenly appeared in the wilderness. However, it was not the cliff itself that shocked Ning Ke and the big black horse so much that they did not dare to breathe. The cliff was extremely wide and spread out in all directions in front of the wilderness. There seemed to be no end in sight. Then, it merged in the distant sky and formed an incomparably wide and deep sinkhole. It was so big that humans could not even imagine it. Looking at the shocking scene in front of him, Ning Ke even had a very strong feeling that even if the entire Chang'an city was placed in it, it would not be able to fill up the sinkhole. He had once been to the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine and was shocked by the magnificent building that the desolate man had dug between heaven and earth 1,000 years ago. However, compared to this sinkhole, the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine was like an inconspicuous hut. Right in the middle of the sinkhole stood an extremely majestic mountain. This mountain seemed to be as high as the highest peak of Min Mountain. However, because the sinkhole was too deep, only a very small part of the mountain was poking out of the ground. The majestic mountain in the sinkhole was at least dozens of miles away from the black horse carriage by the side of the sinkhole. The peak that poked out of the ground was lush and lush. It was the little green mound that Ning Ke had seen earlier. If someone could look down at the ground of the western wilderness from tens of thousands of miles up in the sky, in his eyes, the sinkhole and the mountain in the sinkhole would probably be like an exquisitely designed bonsai. However, when such a magnificent bonsai appeared in the human world, it would definitely shock anyone who saw it for the first time. Ning Ke and the big black horse were very shocked, but they were not in the mood to admire it. Because there were countless yellow temples faintly visible on the majestic mountain in the sinkhole. Those temples in the mountain were probably the Shenkong Temple. It could only be the Shenkong Temple. Of course, Chao Xiaoshu's wife should be a young married woman. I used 5 strokes and the word wife and woman are only a few fingers apart. That's why I typed the previous chapter wrongly. It was a mistake, but I didn't really forget. I'd like to report and apologize to everyone. But recently there have been so many typos. The leader who once said that he would help me fix it seems to have long forgotten about it. If I really want to apologize, I'd really have to apologize countless times. Suppressing the strong urge to write a single chapter for votes, I strongly urge you to vote for the monthly votes in your hands. I'll keep muttering to myself. I'll definitely trouble you to vote for me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 608. A moment later, the man and the horse woke up from the shock. The big black horse could not resist the instinctive fear and turned around to escape, while Ning Ke was still staring at the scene under the cliff in a daze. Shenkong Temple was an unknown place. Even cultivators only vaguely knew that this sacred place of Buddhism was located in the depths of the western wilderness and was rarely visited. Because of the name of Shenkong Temple, many people naturally guessed that Shenkong Temple must be built on the legendary floating island that only those in the divine state could have. Who would have thought that Shenkong Temple was not floating in the sky, but under the ground? Ning Ke looked at the mountain in the distance where the big black horse's body was hidden under the ground and felt puzzled. At this moment, on the cliff far away in the southwest, countless white fog suddenly fell. The fog was slightly moist and heavier than the air. It slowly fell from the edge of the cliff to the bottom of the giant sinkhole, looking like a white waterfall. The giant sinkhole was originally humid and foggy. At this time, the morning fog that gathered on the surface suddenly became a vast expanse of whiteness. The majestic mountain peak was shrouded in clouds and fog. It was impossible to see the bottom of the mountain, as if it had disappeared. Looking from the black carriage, it seemed to have become a floating island floating in the clouds. The yellow temple between the peaks of the island was faintly discernible in the fog, as if it was a Buddhist paradise. Ning Ke looked at the amazing scene in front of him and said with emotion, "So this is the origin of Shenkong Temple?" The big black horse lowered its head and lightly kicked the ground, not daring to make a sound. However, it was extremely anxious and nervous. It thought that even if the sacred place of Buddhism was indescribably magical, it was not worth taking such a big risk. Ning Ke did not think it was very risky. With his eyesight, he could only see the rough shape of the yellow temple in the distant mountain in the giant sinkhole. Then from the mountain to the ground, the black horse carriage was about the size of a black grain of sand and would not attract the attention of the monks in Shenkong Temple. He walked back to the carriage and took out something that looked like an iron cylinder from his luggage. He stretched it slightly and put it to his right eye to look at the mountain in the distance. The iron cylinder was a stargazing mirror that he designed and then carefully made by fourth brother and sixth brother. There were 2 of them. One was given to the headmaster and the other was naturally carried by him. When the headmaster of the academy first used this mirror to observe the stars, he changed it to a telescope based on its effect. Ning Ke did not know about this, but he knew that this mirror was originally used to see far. The clouds and mist in the giant sinkhole flowed very fast. The yellow temple in the mountain peak appeared and disappeared from time to time. Sometimes the world below the mountainside could be seen. Ning Ke held the telescope and looked at the magnified scenery in the circular field of view. He looked at the monks who were doing their morning exercises on the stone ground in front of the temple and remained silent. There was probably wind whistling up from the bottom of the giant sinkhole, and the thick clouds on the mountainside were mostly blown away. Ning Ke looked at the scene at the mountainside through the telescope and was surprised to find that there were layers of terraced fields below the mountainside of the giant peak. Looking at the color of the plants in the fields, it should be the cold rice that was hard to grow in the wilderness. Then he found that there was a river at the bottom of the giant sinkhole and farmhouses. Ning Ke silently observed the Shenkong temple with the telescope. His expression became more and more serious, and his hands holding the iron cylinder became more and more stiff. According to the scene he saw, he estimated that there were about 1,000 monks in the Shenkong temple, and at least 100,000 people lived in the vast field at the bottom of the giant sinkhole. Those dark-skinned and ragged farmers were responsible for providing daily necessities for the Shenkong temple and must bear a lot of heavy labor. Shenkong temple had existed for many years, and those mortals must have lived at the bottom of the giant sinkhole for many years. Many generations of mortals had lived in the damp and dark underground, working hard without complaint to maintain the existence of Shenkong temple. Ning Ke believed that even the most devout Buddhist believer could not bear such torture forever. The monks in Shenkong temple must have their own ways to drive these farmers like animals. In this sense, those farmers were more like serfs that had long been abolished in the Central Plains. In a very short time, many scenes appeared in Ning Ke's mind. The escaped slaves who had their shoulder blades pierced by iron chains, the disrespectful people who fell dead in the cold rice fields, the hundreds of thousands of poor mortals kneeling in front of the mountain peak, and the extravagant life of the monks in the temple. He put down the telescope and looked at the Shenkong temple in the clouds, which looked like a Buddhist country. He frowned slightly. Sang Sang lifted the curtain and saw the scene in front of her. She was shocked speechless. Ning Ke handed the telescope to her and said, "Take a look and then leave. Our trip to the Shenkong temple is not in vain." If Ning Ke was a man of great wisdom and courage, he might climb down the cliff and secretly go to the miserable world under the clouds. He might start a rebellion among the serfs and overthrow the deformed Shenkong temple. Or he might sneak into the Shenkong temple to find the treasures that Buddhism had accumulated for many years. But he was not such a person. After observing the Shenkong temple, he did not hesitate at all. He let the big black horse take the carriage away from the edge of the giant sinkhole and left quietly in the opposite direction. Although the treasures were good, it depended on whether he was alive to get them. Everyone was curious. If he was still the simple Mr. 13 of the academy before he entered the Lang temple, he would go to the Shenkong temple no matter what. Anyway, even if the monks caught him, they would not dare to kill him. But now he had Sang Sang with him. Although the world was big, there seemed to be no place to stay, not to mention the Lang temple where the Buddhism sect was bent on killing Sang Sang. The black carriage moved quietly. After a while, it returned to the place where they had started. It was just a little off course and happened to pass the Bodhi tree. Ning Ke looked at the Bodhi tree outside the window and said, "That should be the place where Buddha passed away." Sang Sang looked at the gray-white trunk and futon-like green tree, thinking that in such a cold autumn, there should be such a lonely tree in the wilderness, which was really a bit magical. She also thought that she actually saw the place of Buddha's parinirvana recorded in the Buddhist scriptures, and could not help but be very surprised. Ning Ke said with a smile, "Now your status is no less than that of Buddha. You don't need to be too afraid of him." After the light of Buddha descended on the Lang temple from the top of Tile Mountain, the two had no chance to discuss that matter. Or it could be said that they did not want to discuss that matter. But after all, they could not stay silent forever. Sang Sang was silent for a long time and whispered, "Will I really destroy this world?" Ning Ke thought of the Shenkong temple he had seen and the cruel truth he had guessed. He said, "I don't know and I don't care. But if it is such a world, it doesn't matter if it is destroyed." He lay in bed until 8 o'clock and then struggled to get up. Continue to write the next chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 609. There was a great horror between life and death. The life and death of the world were tied to one's body. The horror was unimaginable. Sang Sang remained silent after hearing Ning Ke's words. No one knew what she was thinking. Ning Ke reached out and touched her forehead. It was a little cold but not as serious as when she was sick. After thinking for a while, he helped her put on the fur coat and carried her out of the black horse carriage. The two stepped on the frozen ground of the wilderness and walked to the Bodhi tree. Looking around, it was barren. There were a few willows that had already withered. No one knew when the shrill cries of birds came from afar. The Bodhi tree was still green, which was very eye-catching in the wilderness. Ning Ke and Sang Sang had been studying Buddhism in the Lang temple for many days and had entered the Zen sect. They could clearly feel that there was some Buddha nature left on the ground under the Bodhi tree. The Buddha nature was very little and gave people a sense of desolation. There were a few slight dents on the ground under the Bodhi tree. The inside was as smooth as a mirror. What was amazing was that there were no leaves or dust left on the ground. Ning Ke looked at those marks and made a rough sketch in his mind. He found that they were exactly the marks that would be made when a person lay down on the ground. The small dent at the front should be the place where the elbow was used to bear the force. Then, the relatively larger ones below were the marks left by the body on the ground. He said to Sang Sang, "It is said that Buddha closed his eyes while lying on his side when he was in nirvana. It seems that it is true." Sang Sang didn't understand why he brought her to see the Bodhi tree and the relic left by Buddha. Everyone who cultivates Buddhism in the world wants to come to this Bodhi tree to worship. We didn't think about it, but we came here. If there is a so-called lucky chance, this is our lucky chance. Ning Ke said, "Learning Buddhism is good for your body. Even if it can only cure the symptoms, you should continue. The Buddha nature left under the Bodhi tree should be helpful for your cultivation." Sang Sang leaned weakly in his arms and said, "Where are we going?" Ning Ke said, "Back to the academy, of course." Sang Sang's body shrank slightly and looked a little uneasy. She said, "But I am very worried." Ning Ke frowned slightly and asked, "What are you worried about?" "The academy wants to cure me, but if my illness is really a mark left by Yama, how can it be cured? I can feel that the remnant Buddha nature under this Bodhi tree is of no help to me." Sang Sang said sadly, "Have you ever thought that if the academy can't cure me in the end and the world is about to be destroyed because of me, what should we do then?" After a moment of silence, Ning Ke said, "I said I don't care." Sang Sang whispered, "But will the headmaster and senior brothers care as much as you do?" Ning Ke was silent and didn't know how to answer. He knew clearly that his teacher and his two senior brothers really wanted to cure Sang Sang. But if they couldn't, would they really watch the underworld invasion? Sang Sang looked up at him and said seriously, "Ning Ke, have you ever thought about committing suicide?" Ning Ke patted her on the back and said, "If it's one of those sad stories in the books, it might end up like this. But I've already said that this is not a story in the books. I don't like reading, I don't want to die, and I don't want you to die either." Sang Sang said sadly, "But we have no future. The underworld invasion represented the arrival of the everlasting night and the destruction of the human world. The daughter of Yama was naturally the enemy of the whole human world. Even the academy or the Tang Empire couldn't always stand against the whole human world. This meant that no matter how big the world was, there was no place for them." After a long silence, Ning Ke said, "I've read the Ming hand scroll of the tomes of arcane and the notes left by Buddha. I know that Buddha has seen the future of the human world. That's why he built the Shenkong temple, left the chessboard, and left the Yulan bell in order to deal with the underworld invasion." Sang Sang didn't understand why he said these words. Ning Ke looked at her and said, "Master Qishan once said that if you try to see the future, even if it's just a glimpse, the future will change. The Buddha saw the future back then and he had made so many preparations. So the future he saw was naturally very different from the real future." Sang Sang said, "You mean that the future is not predestined, so we don't need to worry?" Ning Ke said, "The future is actually very similar to death. If it's predestined, then it's meaningless to worry. If it can be changed, then we don't need to worry. We just need to work hard to change it." Sang Sang said, "I see. This sentence is very reasonable." Ning Ke said, "Although I can occasionally say some very reasonable words, this sentence was not said by me, but by the headmaster. So I firmly believe it." Then he looked into Sang Sang's eyes and said, "Maybe the whole world won't allow us to live anymore. We still have to go back to the academy. Because if this is the last trust, of course we should leave it to the headmaster." A smile appeared on Sang Sang's pale face and she nodded. Ning Ke smiled and said, "We may die at any time. Tomorrow may be the last day. In fact, it's not necessarily a bad thing. At least it can urge us to do many things we wanted to do before but dared not to do." Sang Sang looked at him quietly and summoned up the courage to say, "I want to have children with you." Ning Ke was stunned and then said with a bitter smile, "It takes a long time to have children. Is there anything you want to do now?" Sang Sang asked, "What do you want to do now?" Ning Ke led her to the Bodhi tree. He took out a sharp arrowhead and carved a line of small words on the tree, which was regarded as the absolute symbol of the world by the Buddhist believers. It was sacred and inviolable. In the autumn of the 16th year of Tianqi era, Ning Ke of the academy came here with his wife, Sang Sang, the daughter of Yama. The black carriage advanced alone in the cold wasteland. Because it was surrounded by boundless wilderness, the extremely fast carriage looked like it was moving slowly on a piece of black and gray paper. Ning Ke and Sang Sang had lived in the wilderness before, so they were familiar with this kind of monotony and desolation. They knew that even in the wilderness in the north of the Central Plains, if they were unlucky, they might not see a person for 10 days or half a month, let alone in the depths of the more desolate wilderness of the west. But he didn't expect that when the carriage was about a dozen miles away from the Bodhi tree, a person appeared in the wilderness in front of them, and it was the kind of person he least wanted to meet now. It was an old monk with a dark face, tattered robes, and dust all over his body. When traveling in the world, the three kinds of people one needed to be wary of were monks, Taoist priests, and women. This wilderness was not far from Shenkong Temple, so this old monk should have something to do with Shenkong Temple. Ning Kei's expression turned serious. Looking at the black horse carriage that slowly stopped a few hundred feet in front of him, the wrinkles on the old monk's face gradually smoothed out. The pebbles in his dark skin rustled and fell. His calm eyes revealed a compassionate expression. The old monk chanted the name of Buddha and said, "Who would have thought that the daughter of Yama and Mr. 13 of the Academy would come to Shenkong Temple? No wonder the world couldn't find you no matter how hard they searched." The voice of the old monk in the wilderness came through the green curtain in front of the black horse carriage. Ning Kei listened in silence and lowered his head to do his own preparations, but his movements paused slightly. This was because he could tell from the old monk's words that the world had been searching for him and Sang Sang for a long time. But didn't he and Sang Sang just escape from Lank Temple? Why did the whole world be alarmed? The old monk slowly raised his right palm and put it in front of his chest with one hand. He thought of a possibility and the pity in his eyes grew stronger. He sighed and said, "It seems that senior brother Chishan really sent you here. Where is the chessboard? If we hand over the Buddha's chessboard, will you let us go?" Ning Kei looked at the green curtain in front of him. His voice was emotionless, but his face suddenly turned pale. His body began to tremble violently, and the threads of his torn black academy uniform became denser. Sang Sang knew that he was injured and was very worried. But she tightly pressed her lips together and did not say a word. She shrank into the corner of the carriage and covered herself with the quilt. The old monk sighed and said, "Mr. 13 of the Academy is indeed as the rumors say. You are the best at fighting in the world. You know that the people of the underworld and the people of the underworld are different, but you still do not forget to disturb my mind." But, he stopped abruptly at this point. The old monk's expression suddenly froze. He felt two extremely sharp and powerful talisman intense. They had silently appeared in front of him and began to cut the cold autumn wind. In the black carriage, the quilt covering Sang Sang's body had many tiny holes. Looking carefully, one could see that each of the holes was actually two very tight openings, and the cotton was peeking out from the holes. Ning Kei's face was pale and his body was trembling. His fingers slowly and laboriously moved in the air in front of him, as if there was a heavy mountain hanging on his fingertips. The black academy uniform on his body was cut into countless pieces by the overflowing talisman intense. The green curtain of the horse carriage was broken into 3 pieces and slowly floated down. The old monk's expression was slightly solemn. He sat cross-legged and turned his palms in front of his chest slightly. An extremely pure and distant Buddhist aura suddenly appeared and protected his body like a light shield. In the black horse carriage dozens of feet away, Ning Kei retracted his fingers and knocked an arrow. His index and middle fingers dug into the hard and tight bowstring and twisted slightly. Then he released it. There was a soft puff and a white turbulence burst out from the end of the iron arrow and disappeared instantly. A dark mark appeared on the falling green curtain. The green cloth and the mark slowly dispersed and scattered into the air like pollen, revealing an extremely round arrow hole. The green curtain was still falling and the arrow hole on it was forming. After a moment there was a sharp hissing sound. Ning Kei's figure tore the green curtain apart and jumped off the horse carriage at lightning speed. He rushed toward the old monk who was dozens of feet away. The 2 extremely sharp talismans in the air of the wilderness were naturally Ning Kei's 2 horizontal talisman. This was his most powerful divine talisman. In the Lank Temple, even Qinyan and Yisu could not break it in a short period of time. However, no one knew where the old sadhu with a dark complexion came from. He could actually use the Buddhist aura to temporarily resist it. However, even so, under the terrifying cutting power of the 2 horizontal talisman, the old sadhu sat cross-legged and used his Buddhist aura to resist. His body, which was covered in dust and gravel, was equivalent to being bound to the ground by the 2 horizontal talisman. Under such circumstances, how could the old sadhu avoid the powerful primordial 13 arrows? The old monk knew that he could not avoid Ning Kei's iron arrow. Just when he faintly sensed that the aura in the black horse carriage in the distance was a little strange, he reacted in advance. The old monk's left palm, which had been quietly resting on his knee, suddenly shone with a golden luster. It looked like it had turned into a Buddha's palm made of pure gold. The old monk crushed the autumn wind in an extremely short period of time. He raised his golden left palm and blocked in front of his chest at a seemingly slow speed. At this moment the iron arrow had arrived. The sharp arrowhead carried an incomparably powerful force and hit the old monk's golden jade-like left palm. There was only a soft sound of impact. The old monk's golden jade-like left palm was shattered into pieces. There was no blood or flesh at the broken part. It shone with a golden luster and scattered everywhere on the wilderness like golden sand. The iron arrow did not stop there after shattering the old monk's golden palm. It flew diagonally upwards and pierced through the old monk's left shoulder. With a spray of blood in his entire shoulder, it turned into a stream of light and disappeared into the distance. The old monk was seriously injured and his face suddenly turned pale. However, he did not reveal any expression of fear. Instead, he was extremely calm. His chest and abdomen sank slightly as he inhaled all the air in front of him. Then he opened his dry lips slightly. However, at this moment, Ning Kei's figure had already arrived like lightning, following the arrow. His right foot stepped heavily on the ground, shaking up the dust and ice shards. With strength from his waist and abdomen, the padao in his hand pierced into the old monk's lower abdomen. The Great Spirit entered with the padao and suddenly exploded. There was a swooshing sound as if a storm had suddenly broken out of the dark clouds. Under the powerful force of the padao and the Great Spirit, the old monk's body turned into countless pieces of flesh and blood, flying everywhere. After a moment, the pieces of flesh and blood fell from the sky and landed on the hard ground of the wilderness. There was a dense patter, as if the storm that fell from the dark clouds had finally reached the ground. Ning Kei sheathed his padao and took out a fire talisman from his sleeve. He threw it on the ground and then rushed back to the black horse carriage. He did not even turn to look at the flesh and the gradually rising talisman fire. The black horse carriage started again and headed into the distance of the wilderness. The flames on the wasteland gradually grew. The flesh and blood of the old ascetic monk were burnt and then burned to ashes. A dozen black crows flew out of nowhere. They smelled the smell of the fire and screeched mournfully. They were very unwilling to give up. In the black horse carriage, Sang Sang asked with a pale face, "Who is it?" "I don't know. I only know that this ascetic monk is very strong. He is definitely not an ordinary monk from the Shenkong temple. He is at least at the level of Master Buoshu. Otherwise, the two horizontal talisman would have killed him." Ning Kei directed the big black horse to gallop in the southeast direction. He took the towel that Sang Sang handed to him and wiped the blood on his face. After a moment of silence, he said, "If he was prepared, it would be very difficult for me to kill him." Sang Sang said, "I don't know who he is and he is so strong." "You killed him just like that?" Ning Kei carefully wiped the blood on the padao and said calmly, "Everyone in the world wants to kill us. So from now on I will kill whoever stands in our way." There are only 2 chapters for today. That's all. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 610. The blood-stained padao was polished until it shone brightly. Because of its dark color, it was not like snow, but like smooth stone. Ning Kei sheathed his padao and looked out the window at the scenery of the wilderness that was rapidly passing by. With the terrifying speed of the black horse carriage, he could have escaped directly and the old ascetic monk would not have been able to stop him. However, the old monk could have alerted the Shenkong temple, so he chose to attack. Just as he had said, the old ascetic monk was definitely not an ordinary person in the Shenkong temple. Especially the palm that glowed with golden light, it was obviously a powerful skill of Buddhism. Its true power was definitely stronger than what he had shown in the battle. However, the old monk had been practicing Buddhism in the Shenkong temple for many years. His dharma was profound and his state was exquisite, but he did not seem to have experienced a real battle. He did not expect Ning Kei to suddenly attack while they were still talking. Moreover, he had used his 3 most powerful skills at once. The old monk was caught off guard and died. Thinking back to the violent battle that had ended in a flash, Ning Kei felt that Yi Hongyu was right. The cultivators in this world only knew how to cultivate and not how to fight. The wind rushed in through the small gap in the window, making a mournful whine. The big black horse dragged the carriage forward in the wilderness at a high speed, heading southeast according to the direction Ning Kei had pointed out. Looking at the wilderness outside the window, Ning Kei silently calculated the distance and the results of his previous calculations. He knocked on the hard carriage board and signaled for the big black horse to stop. Then he jumped off the carriage and walked into the depths of the wilderness. After some time he walked back with a black iron arrow in his hand. The arrowhead was still stained with dried blood. It was the iron arrow that had injured the old ascetic monk. In the Lank Temple, he had used up a few of the 13 iron arrows in his quiver. Now that he was in the depths of the wilderness, he could face fatal danger at any time. Every iron arrow was extremely important to him. Hidden in the huge sinkhole under the ground, clouds and mist still lingered. The yellow temples between the giant peaks were faintly discernible. It was so quiet and peaceful. Suddenly, an indifferent and distant Buddhist name was heard from one of the temples. After a while, dozens of ascetic monks in crimson robes climbed to the ground along the steep stone path between the cliffs. Their faces were expressionless and they looked like stones. The leading monk wore a different robe. He was the president of the Hall of Respect of Shenkong Temple, Chi Mei. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the desolate wilderness in front of him, frowning slightly. The chanting of Buddha in Shenkong Temple came from the chief monk of scripture, who had the highest status in Shenkong Temple. The chief monk of scripture was slightly disturbed and ordered the soldier monks of the Hall of Venerable Ones to search the depths of the wilderness. Even though Chi Mei was the chief monk of the Hall of Venerable Ones, he had to show up in person, and he knew why the chief monk of scripture was disturbed. The chief preaching monk of the Shenkong Temple had been sentenced by the Commandment Hall to cultivate in the wilderness 3 years ago because he had violated the Buddhist precepts and was burdened by his worthless illegitimate son. Today the chief preaching monk should have returned to the Shenkong Temple. However, no one had seen the chief preaching monk. Chi Mei led the ascetic monk soldiers and followed the senses of the chief preaching monk into the depths of the wilderness. They walked until the evening. When the twilight was as red as blood, they finally saw the pile of ashes. The wind in the wilderness was strong, but the ashes were not completely extinguished because there were a few pieces of bone that could not be completely incinerated by any kind of fire. Looking at the colorful bones in his hand, Chi Mei was silent. The ascetic monk soldiers in red robes looked sorrowful. They sat cross-legged around the ashes and began to chant the reincarnation scripture with respect and sincerity. Chi Mei handed the bones to a monk for safekeeping with a solemn expression. Then he knelt in front of the ashes and reached into the ashes. He began to search silently and quietly. His fingers, which were like stone branches, moved slowly in the ashes of the chief preaching monk like a sieve and did not miss any place. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The remains of the preaching monk were burned through by the talisman fire. Other than a few bone particles, the rest had turned into fine white ash. Chi Mei should not have found anything, but as his fingers moved, his expression became more and more serious. This was because his fingertips could feel a majestic great spirit in the ash. Chi Mei stood up and suddenly walked back the way he came. Only then did he remember that when he passed by the Bodhi tree, he felt that the tree seemed to be a little different from the one he had seen every day for decades. He walked to the Bodhi tree and looked at the line of small words engraved on the gray bark. His expression became colder and colder, and the angry wisdom king's flame in his eyes became brighter. In the 16th year of the Tianqi era, Ning Ke of the academy came here with his wife, daughter of Yama. Why was it 16 years? Chi Mei was slightly puzzled. He brushed the ground with his monk's sleeves. The gravel on the surface of the wilderness rolled and a very shallow rut appeared. He followed the rut for dozens of feet, and then the faint traces of the rut completely disappeared on the ground of the wilderness. He looked up into the distance and guessed where the black horse carriage was heading. The night was approaching. The world in the giant sinkhole had already entered a long night in advance. The last sunset could still be seen in the yellow temple at the highest point between the giant peaks. A distant bell rang from the temple and gradually spread to the bottom of the mountain. Countless yellow temples rang the bell at the same time. The bell of the Shenkong Temple left the quiet underground world and came to the desolate ground. Then it spread in all directions. It would not take many days for the whole world to know that the daughter of Yama was still alive and that she was fleeing in the western wilderness with Ning Ke of the academy. In the depths of the wilderness, a black horse carriage stopped beside a well that had been abandoned for thousands of years. A moment later, Ning Ke came out from the depths of the well with a full water bag in his hand. No one knew how he managed to find water in the well that had been abandoned for many years. The night was always cold. In order to avoid exposing himself, Ning Ke did not make a bonfire. Instead, he put a few pieces of fire talismans in the copper basin in the carriage to keep warm. This method was too extravagant. Even if he had abundant psyche power, he still had to calculate the consumption of talismans to ensure that he and Sang Sang could walk out of the wilderness. Ning Ke simply ate some dry food with cold water and began to cook porridge for Sang Sang. While waiting for the water to boil, he used the time to sort out his equipment. Since the road ahead was difficult, equipment was naturally the most important thing. He was the most hardworking person. These years he had stored a lot of talismans. However, at the beginning his state was relatively low, so the talismans he wrote could not be used in the battle of his current state. There were only about 20 pieces of talismans that could be used in battle, and there were not many iron arrows left in the arrow box. The next chapter will come later. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 6:11. While cleaning, Ning Ke saw the chessboard. After a short pause, he threw it into the corner and picked up the big black umbrella. He couldn't help but shake his head. Compared with its appearance in the past 10 years, the big black umbrella had changed a lot. The layer of greasy dirt on the umbrella's surface had completely disappeared, revealing a very thin and almost transparent pure black cloth. There were even a few holes on the edges which looked very miserable. The big black umbrella that used to be indestructible and could withstand all attacks in the world had become like this. One could imagine how terrifying the power of the light of Buddha in the Lank Temple was. Ning Ke continued with his work. He sorted out the iron arrows, paper talismans, and spare replacement arrowheads and placed them in a convenient place. Then he lifted up the bottom of the carriage and counted the dry food hidden inside, the strange stones needed to activate the talisman array of the carriage, as well as the yellow fruit eaten by the big black horse. According to the current amount, it should be enough to return to the academy from the wilderness. Even if the dry food was not enough, he would not worry about not being able to find food in the wilderness. It was not difficult for him to find water. If there was no other way, he could just use his psyche power to write a few more water talismans. The paper talismans in the copper basin had long disappeared and turned into warm yellow flames. This was a fire talisman that Ning Ke had written a long time ago. It looked powerful, but in fact, the temperature of the flame and the length of time it could be maintained were very ordinary. The water in the small pot on the copper basin had just boiled. The rice was rolling up and down in the water. It was hard to tell how long it would take for the rice to be cooked. Ning Ke took a piece of ginseng and walked down from the carriage. He called back the big black horse that was on guard thousands of feet away. He touched its mane and thought of the scene of them going through life and death together in the Lank Temple. He was touched and said, "From now on, as long as I have a mouthful of meat, you will have a mouthful of soup." After saying this, he stuffed the ginseng into the big black horse's mouth and patted its head. The big black horse chewed and swallowed the ginseng. It raised its head unwillingly and looked at Ning Ke pitifully, smacking its lips. Its meaning was very clear. "Master, although you have always been shameless, only willing to give me soup to drink when there is meat to eat, but now you are letting me eat such a thin piece of ginseng. How can I be full? You should know that I was scared out of my wits by that strange sinkhole in that scary temple. I carried you for more than 300 miles. Don't you understand the principle of not starving?" Ning Ke felt a little ashamed and said, "I'll definitely get you some meat tomorrow. That's all for today." The big black horse shook its head gently. It was a little angry but more helpless. The porridge in the pot was ready and emitted a faint fragrance. Ning Ke helped Sang Sang sit up and fed her. He said, "There's some medicine in the porridge. I stole it from that fool. Don't let it know." Sang Sang was a little embarrassed as she looked out of the carriage. She suppressed her laughter and lowered her head to eat the porridge. After eating half a bowl, she felt a little better. Thinking of his injury, she said, "You eat some too." Ning Ke said, "I have already eaten." Sang Sang said, "It's cold water and dry food. How can it taste good?" Ning Ke said, "Life is better after we arrived at the city of Wei. When we were in Min Mountain, it was a good life to have dry food. Don't worry that I can't get used to it." Sang Sang thought that it was easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but it was difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. The dry food he ate now was definitely not as good as it was when he was young. However, she knew Ning Ke's character and did not try to persuade him. She just silently told herself to get better quickly. The porridge in the pot was still boiling, making popping sounds. Steam rose and the carriage was very warm. Only the big black umbrella in the corner and the chessboard seemed to be emitting a chill. The seemingly ordinary chessboard was naturally the chessboard left by Buddha. Ning Ke could not understand why the chessboard appeared in the carriage when it should have been in the chessboard. We now know that we are deep in the western wilderness and the location has been confirmed. However, we do not know how many days have passed since the incident in Lank Temple. He said, the old monk said that the world has been searching for us for a long time. It seems that the chessboard has played its role. We only ran on the mountain path for a moment, but a long time might have passed in the real world outside. Although it is still late autumn, I think it is at least 10 days later. Sang Sang felt that his deduction was very reasonable. She thought of the light of Buddha in Lank Temple and felt a lingering fear. She also thought of the movements in the ruined temple before entering the chessboard. She said, "You guessed that it was Mr. First and Mr. Second who broke into the temple that day. What happened to them after that? I wonder if anything happened to them." Ning Kei said, "Don't worry. There are at most 2 people in the world who can deal with my 2 senior brothers at the same time. However, they are afraid of angering the teacher, so they definitely do not dare to do anything." The 2 people he was talking about were naturally the Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey and the chief preaching monk of Shenkong Temple. I am more worried about Master Qishan. Ning Kei thought of the virtuous and benevolent high monk of the Buddhism sect. He thought of the scene when the master opened the chessboard and sent them away. He frowned and said, "The master's health is not good. He used the mantra to help me fight with Qin Yan and then forcefully reversed the chessboard. I really don't know if he can withstand it." Sang Sang was also very worried when she heard that. She took out a black chess piece from her waist and looked at it blankly. Ning Kei knew that this was the black chess piece that Sang Sang had placed on the chessboard in the last game of the 3 games of chess on Tile Mountain. He said in a low voice, "I have a bad feeling. Keep this chess piece as a souvenir." Sang Sang nodded and clenched her fist tightly to hold the black chess piece. She looked at the chessboard and said, "There is no aura of Buddha on the chessboard. Is it destroyed?" Ning Kei said, "After all, it is a relic of Buddha. Even if it cannot open the world in the chessboard, it is good to keep it and sell it. It is not good to just find a place to bury it." As the night deepened, the big black horse had already fallen asleep. It was coarse and thick, so it did not care about the howling cold wind in the wilderness at night. Its sleeping style was also very different from that of ordinary horses. It did not completely support its body weight with its 4 hooves, nor did it lie on the ground like those weak old horses. Instead, it leaned against the carriage with its head tilted like a drunkard. Its nostrils were slightly puffed up, and it smelled the fragrance of porridge coming from the window. It slept very soundly. The carriage was filled with the hot mist of porridge and the talisman paper that was still slowly releasing heat in the copper basin. It was a bit stuffy and suffocating. Ning Kei reached out and opened a gap on the roof of the carriage. Silver starlight came in through the gap and sprinkled on him and Sang Sang. It fell on the surface of everything and became the world of silver that they both loved the most. Sang Sang curled up in his arms and grabbed his clothes with her right hand. She looked at the night sky through the gap and found that the starry night in the wilderness was as bright as before. However, she always felt that someone was looking at her among the stars. She could not help but feel a little confused and scared, and held on to Ning Kei's clothes even tighter. Ning Kei did not know what she was thinking at this time. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead. He found that her forehead was a little cold, but it was much better than when she was sick. He looked up at the stars in the night sky and suddenly felt something. He reached out and pointed at the starry sky through the gap. He moved his fingertips slowly and looked extremely solemn. Sang Sang looked at the trace of movement of his fingertips and confirmed that it was not the 2 horizontal talisman. She asked nervously, "A new talisman?" Ning Kei said proudly, "It is not a talisman. It is just a very desolate calligraphy section with a few words. It can at least be ranked in the top 10 of my works. How much do you think it is worth?" It was all silver in the carriage. However, those were all illusory. A calligraphy section written by fingers in the air, no matter how desolate the world was also illusory. It was worthless if it could not be preserved. Sang Sang shook her head with some regret and said, "If we really want to go back to the academy, we don't know how many dangers there will be on the way. We can't sell these words. It is better to comprehend a few new talismans as soon as possible. Although I have entered the knowing destiny state, my master has already gone to the divine kingdom with your bastard master. Without anyone to guide me, I can at most be regarded as a half-divine talisman master. I can already be regarded as a talisman Taoism genius if I can write an infinitive talisman. It is not so easy to comprehend a second talisman." Ning Kei thought of what Sang Sang had said before and remembered a very important thing. He looked at her and said, "No matter what danger we encounter on the way, you are not allowed to use divine skills, let alone open the big black umbrella." Sang Sang understood what he meant and nodded gently. If she used the West Hill divine skills, it was very likely that she would have a relapse, die or attract the attention of Yama. If she opened the big black umbrella, it was very likely to cause some other changes. It was also very likely to attract the attention of Yama or the powerful people of the Buddhism and Taoism sects. Either situation was extremely dangerous. In the early morning when Sang Sang was still asleep, Ning Ke had already woken up. He looked at the sky and wind direction and confirmed that it was a good day for them to travel. Then he woke up the big black horse with his fist and urged it to hurry on. However, the black horse carriage did not go far before it met the enemy. They were in the depths of the wilderness where there were few people. It was difficult to even meet a person, let alone an enemy. The only explanation for this situation was that Haotian had probably discovered the existence of the daughter of Yama. The invisible but ever-running way of heaven had begun to try to destroy her. This was a slightly undulating meadow. The yellow grass on the meadow had long been blown down by the cold wind. Maybe it was dead or maybe it was waiting to be reborn next spring. Dozens of grassland cavalrymen in leather armor were silently waiting above the meadow. From time to time, they stretched out their hands to comfort the tired war horses under them. It seemed that they had also experienced a long journey to come here. Ning Ke glanced at the grassland cavalrymen. Without observing the details of their armors, he could guess where they came from. In the western wilderness, only the tribes of the Right King's palace could have such elite cavalrymen. At this moment, the black horse carriage was about 2,000 feet away from the grassland cavalrymen of the Right King's palace. It was still out of the shooting range of the arrows. He could totally let the big black horse take advantage of its speed and charge diagonally. He believed that no matter how good the cavalrymen's riding skills were, they would not be able to catch up with him. However, the grassland cavalrymen were scattered on the meadow and the charging line was very long. It seemed sparse and weak, but in fact, it was to prevent the black horse carriage from escaping. If Ning Ke wanted to leave without fighting, he would have to make a big detour to bypass the meadow. However, that would take too much time. The most important problem was that Ning Ke had been dealing with the horse gang and grassland cavalrymen in the wilderness for many years. He was very sure that there would be endless cavalrymen coming to intercept him. If he were to turn around and escape when he met someone who wanted to intercept him, with the other party's riding skills and hunting skills, they would only need to repeat a few times to surround the black horse carriage in the depths of the wilderness. That would be very dangerous. Therefore Ning Ke did not avoid them. The black horse carriage continued to move slowly towards the meadow, and it was getting faster and faster. The steel wheels rolled over the grass that was covered with thin frost, splashing up a lot of mud. A cavalry leader on the meadow noticed that the black horse carriage was actually rushing towards him. His face did not show any joy or look like he was looking at an idiot. Instead, it became unusually serious. Then he slowly pulled out the saber at his waist. Whether it was the Left King's palace, the Right King's palace or the Golden Palace, the grassland cavalrymen and the horse gang all used curved sabers. A few years ago, when Ning Ke was a professional woodcutter in the city of Wei, he was also very used to this kind of curved saber. Because this kind of saber was very effective in cutting people's heads. Dozens of grassland cavalrymen pulled out the curved sabers from their sheaths at the same time, and the sound of metal clanging could be heard. When the black horse carriage reached the bottom of the meadow at a high speed and should not be able to change its direction anymore, another dozen cavalrymen silently appeared behind the leader. They took out their bows and aimed at the horse carriage. To Ning Ke there was nothing new in the wilderness. He was even more familiar with the tactics of the grassland cavalrymen and the horse gang than he was with the military discipline of the Tang Empire. Therefore, when he saw the archers who were previously hiding under the meadow, he was not surprised or shocked. Instead, he felt that it was a little boring because he was too familiar with it. The bowstrings buzzed and the arrows pierced through the air. More than 10 arrows drew an arc in the air and shot towards the black horse carriage from the meadow that was dozens of feet away. How can a dozen boxwood bows be used as a projectile? The horse carriage may be a big target, but it's not like that. Ning Ke looked behind him. Sang Sang was still sleeping soundly, her two small hands tightly gripping the corner of the blanket. Her eyebrows were tightly furrowed, and he did not know what she saw in her dream. He flew out of the carriage and landed on the back of the big black horse, his legs lightly squeezing the horse's belly. The big black horse neighed joyfully and dashed forward. Just a moment ago, Ning Ke had already untied the connection between the shaft and the body of the carriage. The big black horse charged forward and immediately separated from the carriage. The carriage that had lost its power continued to move forward under the influence of inertia, but at a slower speed. In the process of gradually slowing down, there was a series of soft popping sounds in the black carriage. The skylight on the ceiling, the windows on both sides and the front door were all locked by springs. The arrows thrown by the grassland cavalrymen finally fell, whistling mournfully. 5 or 6 arrows accurately hit the carriage that was slowly coming to a stop. However, for the carriage that was made of pure steel, being hit by these seemingly terrifying arrows was not even as good as tickling. The arrows hit the carriage and broke in the middle, falling to the ground. They looked like a few dry straws trying to pierce through a stone. It was very funny and very pitiful. The black carriage was very thick. Once it was completely sealed, it was difficult to hear outside sounds. The arrows that hit the carriage made a few light sounds, like birds pecking at their food. In the carriage, Sang Sang was still sleeping soundly. She probably heard the sound of the arrows falling and waved her arms unhappily, as if trying to drive the sound away from her ears. Then she turned over and continued to sleep. Correction of a key mistake. I made a mistake in writing starlight as moonlight. At the end of the original chapter, I said that from the next day onwards, I would adjust my biological clock and try to write during the day and update during the day. End of report. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 6:12. Some of the arrows fell on the carriage and turned into broken straws, while others fell on the big black horse. However, once the big black horse sped up, it was not affected by the slope of the meadow at all. In an instant, it turned into a cloud of black smoke and dust, leaving the arrows far behind. The cavalrymen on the meadow who were about to charge were shocked speechless when they saw this scene. Their leader shouted and the cavalrymen came to their senses. They shouted loudly and brandished their sharp machetes, dashing downwards. However, they had only dashed 100 feet when they suddenly spread out. Some of them charged towards the cloud of dust created by the big black horse, while the rest charged towards the black carriage that had stopped. It had to be said that the cavalry leader's command in such a short period of time was very correct. The carriage stopped at the bottom of the meadow and could not be moved. It was completely a target waiting to be slaughtered. If Ning Ke did not care, the grassland cavalry could kill the people in the carriage in the shortest time possible. If Ning Ke was worried about the lives of the people in the carriage, he would stop charging and turn back. Then he would lose his greatest advantage in speed and be caught in a chaotic battle. In the chaotic battle of the wilderness, roaming and shooting were the grassland cavalry's best fighting methods. However, to the cavalry leader's surprise, Ning Ke did not turn back to rescue Sang Sang in the carriage. He did not even hesitate and continued to charge above the meadow. The big black horse dragged a black shadow on the frosty white meadow at an extremely terrifying speed. The cavalry leader suddenly felt a little flustered. He shouted orders for a dozen of his subordinates to stop the enemy at all costs. In his opinion, even if they could not kill the person on the black horse as long as they could hold him back for a short period of time, his subordinates who were charging towards the carriage would be able to complete the difficult task today. Ning Ke looked at the dozens of grassland cavalry approaching and felt the cold wind blowing away the warmth on his cheeks. He became calmer and calmer. He reached out his right hand and held the hilt of the knife that stuck out from his shoulder. Both sides were charging at high speed and the encounter was extremely fast. The grassland cavalry at the front waved his machete, his face twisted and ferocious. He roared and slashed at Ning Quebec. With a crisp sound, the grassland cavalry's head was separated from his body. The warhorse carried the headless body and continued to gallop forward at high speed. The blood spurting from the cavalry's neck seemed to dye the sky red. The headless cavalry brushed past the big black horse and continued galloping for several feet before the corpse fell to the ground. At this time, the head that had flown in the air also fell, landing right beside the dead cavalry's hand. The previous clear and crisp sound was actually the combination of two sounds. The first sound was the grinding sound of the padao being unsheathed, and the second sound was the grinding sound of the padao cutting through the hard neck of the cavalryman. However, these two sounds eventually merged into one and became a single sound. One could imagine how fast Ning Ke's actions of unsheathing his padao to behead the cavalryman were, as if there was no interruption in between. The big black horse charged into the charging formation formed by the dozens of grassland cavalry like black lightning. The padao in Ning Ke's hand was like countless black lightning bolts, constantly flashing and then extinguishing among the cavalry. In just a few breaths, the big black horse had crossed paths with the dozens of grassland cavalrymen. A series of muffled groans could be heard. The cavalrymen either covered their bleeding necks or covered their bleeding chests as they fell from their horses one after another, smashing onto the hard ground of the meadow with loud thuds. Ning Ke did not even look at the cavalrymen and continued to charge above the meadow. The big black horse was too fast, and so was the speed at which he waved his knife. In a moment he had killed more than 10 cavalrymen. The meadow was stained with blood, but not a single drop of blood could be seen on him and the big black horse. The leader of the cavalry on the meadow suddenly turned pale. Last night, he had already known that the enemy this time was a cultivator. It was not that he had never fought with cultivators from the Ueluan kingdom, and he had even killed a master in the see-through state. He thought that he had taken the matter seriously enough, but he did not expect that the enemy today was not just a cultivator who only knew how to control a flying sword, but also a cultivator who was so terrifying. With a loud shout, more than 10 cavalrymen drew their bows and released arrows. However, the big black horse was too fast and most of the arrows missed. Occasionally, the arrows that were shot in front of the horse were casually blocked by Ning Kei's knife. In a moment, Ning Kei rode the big black horse onto the meadow. The sound of the padao slicing through the air rang out, followed by the sound of blood splattering. The archers did not even have time to put up any resistance before they were killed by the knife. The leader of the cavalry had just raised the machete in his hand when he found that his chest had been pierced by a grayish-black padao. At that moment he could even feel the coldness of the Tang-style padao. He fell to the ground and looked at the enemy who had completely ignored him. Extreme fear appeared in his gray eyes, but that fear soon turned into pleasure. He thought to himself that no matter how strong Ning Kei was, the people in the carriage must have been killed. How could Ning Kei bring them back to life? The leader of the cavalry's right foot was still in the stirrup. The warhorse was startled and dragged him a few feet on the ground. The shock caused blood to gush out of his chest. The scene of the cavalry besieging the carriage under the meadow entered his eyes. His face suddenly turned extremely pale, and at the last moment before he died, he groaned unwillingly. Ning Kei rode on the big black horse and rushed to the meadow. In a very short time he killed the leader of the cavalrymen and more than a dozen archers. He did not rush back to the meadow to rescue Sang Sang. Instead, he rode on the big black horse through the corpses of the cavalrymen and picked up 2 bows and a few quivers of arrows before turning the horse around. At the bottom of the meadow, at least 30 cavalrymen were besieging the black carriage. The carriage stood alone in the same spot, unable to move. It looked like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. However, when the cavalrymen tried to break the carriage, they were shocked to find that their machetes could not even leave a mark on the carriage, let alone break it open. It was then that the cavalrymen realized that the carriage was not a lamb, but the terrifying black armored cavalrymen of the Tang Empire. They wore thick armor and stood there motionless, allowing the cavalrymen to hack at them. There was no way they could break through it. As time passed, the cavalrymen besieging the carriage became more and more anxious, and even a little desperate. Several cavalrymen got off their horses and walked to the side of the carriage, slashing at the wheels. In their minds, even if the carriage was made of stainless steel, the wheels were at most wooden wheels covered with iron. With their strength and the sharpness of their machetes, they should be able to break the wheels. If they could break the wheels, even if the person in the carriage survived, he would not be able to move an inch in the wilderness. In the end, he would still be suppressed to death by the warriors of the royal court and the masters of the temple. However, these grassland cavalrymen once again fell into despair. After a round of slashing, they realized that the carriage from the inside to the outside was made of stainless steel. In their despair, they could not help but feel a strong sense of indignation and anger. A carriage made entirely of stainless steel. Was it not even heavier than the golden Buddha worshipped by the royal court? How could such a heavy carriage travel on the wilderness and gallop so quickly? It was also at this moment that some of the cavalrymen noticed the end of the battle on the meadow. Looking at the black lightning speeding down from above the meadow, they could not help but cry out in fear. A commotion gradually arose. A slightly older cavalryman shouted sternly. He knew that it was impossible for them to defeat the powerful enemy, so he made a decision in a very short time. He sent out 2 of the most skillful cavalrymen to leave the battle on the meadow and ordered them to inform the main cavalry of the royal court at all costs. The rest of the cavalrymen were organized by him and charged toward the enemy. Looking at the 2 cavalrymen who left the carriage and galloped away at high speed, Ning Kei guessed their intentions. He took the bow he had picked up earlier from the side of the horse, knocked an arrow on the string and took aim silently. The bow was made of boxwood, the standard equipment for elite grassland cavalrymen and powerful horse gangs. It was also the professional equipment that Ning Kei had used to kill horse gangs in the past. Before the primordial 13 arrows were invented, he had always used this bow. The familiar bow and arrow, the familiar geographical environment, the familiar battlefield, and the even more powerful Shubi Lake woodcutters. This sudden battle could not have a second outcome. Two sounds of bowstring vibrating were heard, followed by a crisp snap of the bowstring. The two cavalrymen who had left the meadow in the opposite direction to report the news shook and fell off their horses. Their corpses with arrows in their chests were dragged by the war horses for a long distance before they stopped. Looking at the boxwood bow with the broken string, Ning Ke frowned slightly. After cultivating the Great Spirit, his body was much stronger and stronger than before. Now that he had been using iron bows and arrows for a long time without using ordinary weapons, he was not used to it. The frown only lasted for a moment. He still had a boxwood bow in his hand. Aiming at the cavalryman under the meadow, he knocked an arrow and shot again. The sound of the bow breaking through the air could be heard. Every time the bowstring vibrated, a cavalryman would fall. Then he raised his padao again. There were corpses all over the meadow. Hot blood poured on the withered grass that had been crushed by the frost, melting the thin frost and making the grass branches vibrate slightly. Then it condensed into a thicker and heavier blood frost that pressed down on the withered grass again. Ning Ke walked among the corpses of the cavalrymen and skillfully picked up the spoils of war according to his habit in the past. Now that he could not exchange the enemy's heads for military merits or silver, he naturally would not bother to chop off the heads. He just picked up the intact bow and arrow and 2 pairs of leather boots from the corpses of the 2 cavalrymen. A soft sound came from the black carriage. Sang Sang pushed open the door from inside and walked out. She rubbed her sleepy eyes and looked at Ning Quebec. She asked, "What happened? It was so noisy earlier." Ning Ke walked towards her and said, "I killed some people." Only then did Sang Sang notice that there were corpses all around the carriage. She could not help but be slightly startled. Ning Ke raised the 2 pairs of leather boots in his hand and said, "I got 2 pairs of shoes. You can try them on later." Sang Sang shook her head and said, "You brought back so many pairs of shoes over the years, but none of them fit me. I think I have to change them myself this time." There was a typo in the previous chapter. It should have been Silver Starlight instead of Moonlight. I was so happy when I wrote about Sang Sang's favorite silver world. In fact, the most troublesome thing in writing this book was to avoid these words. Other than the Ueluan Kingdom, which was interesting, the moon did not appear in other places. I remember writing about the white of the moon. Now that I think about it, there is no way to go around it. I was adjusting for the time difference today, so I didn't sleep. After writing this chapter, I still have to sleep for a while. Anyway, there will be another chapter today, so it will definitely be at night. But I really like this chapter. This is not narcissism, I really like it. This is what I want. The so-called pass together, I need monthly votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 6:13. Over the next few days, the Black Horse carriage encountered several groups of grassland cavalries in the wilderness. Ning Ke killed 2 of the smaller groups with extreme coldness. When he used his binoculars to observe that there were more than 300 elite cavalries, he did not hesitate to take a detour to avoid them. If there was anyone in the wilderness who could organize 300 elite cavalries, it would either be a cavalry unit under the direct command of the palace or the main force of a large tribe. No matter how confident Ning Ke was, he did not want to confront such an enemy head-on. One of the reasons was that the big black horse was not wearing armor. More importantly, no matter how powerful he was after entering the knowing destiny state, no matter how strong his body was, no matter how vigorous his psyche power was, he would not be able to withstand the waves of enemies. His psyche power would eventually be depleted and his body would gradually become exhausted. If he was forced into such a situation by continuous enemies, there was nothing he could do but wait for death. 1,000 years ago, the Desolate lost the war with the Tangs. According to the surrender agreement, they gave up the wilderness and moved to the cold region and hot sea in the extreme north. The people of the Central Plains could not adapt to the life in the wilderness, so they did not migrate to the north in large numbers. After the Desolate left, the gap was filled by barbarians who moved from the extreme west and gradually evolved into the grassland barbarians of today. The grassland tribes were scattered on the vast land in the north of the mainland like stars in the sky. Because of the natural boundaries of Min Mountain, they were divided into 3 palaces. Among them, the Golden Palace was the strongest, while the Right Palace was the weakest because of its small population and the fact that most of its herdsmen believed in Buddhism. The several groups of cavalries that Ning Ke met in the wilderness were from the Right Palace or the tribes under the jurisdiction of the palace. He had already guessed that these barbarians who worship Buddhism must have received an order from the Shenkong Temple. The cavalries of the Right Palace did not pose a real threat to the Black Horse carriage. However, thousands of cavalries came one after another and searched the wilderness at all costs. In the end, the black horse carriage was slowed down. One day, when the black carriage passed by a red and barren rocky mountain, snow suddenly fell from the cold sky of the wilderness. The snowflakes were like cotton being torn into pieces, slowly falling to the ground. It seemed gentle, but because the temperature of the ground was too low, the snow accumulated very quickly. It didn't take long for the red rocky mountain to be painted white. Sang Sang found a large piece of white cloth from somewhere and used it to cover the walls of the black carriage. Then she used the rest of the white cloth to make some simple cuts and used it to cover the big black horse. Looking at the carriage wrapped in white cloth and the big black horse, as well as its eyes that were exposed through the holes in the white cloth, Ning Kei's mood changed slightly. He felt that he had seen such a naturally evil scene before, but he could not remember where. The wind and snow became more and more blinding, and the road in the wilderness became more and more difficult to travel. Ning Kei drove the horse carriage around the rock mountain and found a slightly higher but hidden place to stop. He took out his binoculars and looked down at the wilderness. The wilderness had become a monotonous world of black and white. Snowflakes fluttered down from the sky. It was completely silent. No sound could be heard and no moving figures could be seen. Ning Kei held the cold telescope and looked at the wilderness quietly for a long time. He did not lose his patience because of the desolate and boring world in the mirror. Finally, he saw what he wanted to see, or rather what he did not want to see. 10 monks appeared in the field of vision through the telescope. Those monks were wearing thick, snow-white cotton robes, and shoes woven from dense grass. Under the shoes, there were slender wooden boards that were slightly tilted at the front and back. In their hands there were 2 thin and hard iron staffs. Gliding in the wind and snow, their speed was as fast as a galloping horse. Ning Kei guessed that these monks were from Shenkong Temple. He could not help but frown. He thought that Shenkong Temple was far away from the human world and had experienced wind, frost, rain, and snow for a long time. It seemed that the monks in the temple had adapted well to the environment of the wilderness. Even the wind and snow could not stop them. It was really troublesome. What surprised him more was that these monks did not wear felt hats or leather boots. The cold and heat seemed to have lost their power to them. In terms of the concept of cultivation, these monks had already entered the see-through realm. Although he was vigilant, he did not leave immediately. Instead, he continued to sit in front of the window and observe. He observed the Shenkong Temple monks passing by and calculated the area of the surrounding wilderness, the speed of these monk soldiers and the frequency of their search. Then he told Sang Sang in a low voice. Sang Sang wrote down the numbers on a piece of paper. After thinking for a while, she raised her head and said, "At least 200 people are needed for their search in this wilderness to be meaningful. The Holy Land of Buddhism would naturally not do something meaningless." Her words revealed a fact. There were at least 200 Shenkong Temple monks in the wilderness where the black horse carriage was. What did 200 see-through realm mean? Even the Tang Empire could hardly gather 200 see-through realm cultivators. Ning Kei was silent. He had thought that only the West Hill Divine Palace could send out so many masters at any time and place. He did not expect that Shenkong Temple could also do so. He did not have the confidence to defeat 200 Shenkong Temple monks. He did not even have the intention to fight. If he was given enough time to roam and kill slowly for 2 or 3 years, he might really be able to kill all these ascetic monks. However, Haoyin and Buddha would not give him and Sang Sang that much time. He did not understand why the grassland cavalry and the monks of the Shenkong Temple were always able to find the black horse carriage in the vast and boundless wilderness. Ning Kei's puzzlement and vigilance were once again verified in the next moment. The horse carriage's camouflage was good enough. All traces on the snow had been erased by him, and the wind and snow obscured their vision. However, the 2 groups of ascetic monks on the wilderness seemed to faintly sense something. They stabbed the snow with their staffs and walked towards the rocky mountain without hesitation. Ning Kei knew that he could not continue to hide. He punched the wall of the carriage heavily. Hearing the heavy pounding coming from behind, the big black horse's breathing suddenly quickened. The moisture exhaling from its mouth and nose passed through the white cloth and turned into white mist in the cold wind and snow. Its eyes that were exposed outside the holes revealed a violent and excited emotion. Its hind hooves kicked hard and pulled the horse carriage out of the rocky mountain. The 20 Shenkong Temple ascetic monks on the wilderness faintly saw a white figure in the wind and snow. Their expressions suddenly turned serious. The iron staffs in their hands were so fast that they seemed to turn into shadows. The wooden boards under their feet rubbed against the soft snow at high speed as they chased after the white figure, trying to stop it. Ning Kei did not sit in the carriage. He stood behind the big black horse and looked at the ascetic monks gliding at high speed on the snowy ground. He waited in silence as the wind and snow hit his face. There were 50 arrows in the quiver beside the shaft and 2 boxwood bows. He also carried a boxwood bow on his shoulder. If the monks of Shenkong Temple came near, the bowstring would make a series of beads. The ascetic monks glided across the snowy ground at high speed, their expressions stern and determined. From time to time they would let out a few low shouts. In their view, the sudden snowstorm today was the Buddha's anger towards the daughter of Yama. In the snowy environment, no matter how fast the carriage was, it could not be compared to them. However, these ascetic monks did not know that Ning Kei's horse carriage was different from ordinary horse carriages in the world. The wheels touched the ground very lightly. No matter how soft the snow was, it could not affect it. The big black horse neighed excitedly. Its 4 hooves were as fast as lightning, splashing up countless snowflakes. The white cloth covering its body flapped in the snowy wind. It carried the seemingly heavy carriage forward at high speed on the snowy ground. About 10 breaths later, the carriage gradually left the ski-wielding monks far behind. The wheels of the carriage only left a very shallow rut on the snow. It seemed that they would be temporarily safe after getting rid of these ascetic monks. However, reality and imagination were always very different. After that encounter in the snowy ground, the black horse carriage encountered several batches of Shenkong Temple ascetic monks in the wilderness in a very short period of time. Although they managed to avoid them all the time, they had to adjust their direction and escape became more difficult. The continuous encounters with enemies increased the pace of their escape. The atmosphere in the carriage gradually became tense. For the first time, the big black horse's eyes, which were not covered by the cloth, showed anxiety instead of excitement. It even became a little uneasy. Ning Kei understood that the grassland cavalry they encountered a few days ago was only a prelude. Only when the Shenkong Temple monks joined in the chase in the wilderness would their escape truly begin. At this moment he once again thought of the thing that made him vigilant and puzzled. His and Sangsang's whereabouts had been exposed, but eldest brother, who had entered the limitless state, had never appeared. It was because eldest brother did not know where he was. Then how could Shenkong Temple accurately find his whereabouts every time? He looked at the corner of the carriage and his eyes fell on the chessboard. After thinking for a while he picked up the chessboard and placed it on his knees. Then he took out the big black umbrella and tore a piece of cloth from the edge of the umbrella to wrap it around the chessboard. During the escape, the black horse carriage stopped beside a withered, jade-like tree that had long been frozen by the snow. Ning Kei picked up the chessboard wrapped by the black umbrella's cloth and jumped off the carriage. He took out his padao and dug a deep hole under the tree. Without hesitation he threw the chessboard in and filled the hole. The black horse carriage moved again. The snow and wind were strong. After a while, the ground under the withered tree was covered with a thick layer of snow. Even if someone stood in front of the tree, they would not be able to tell that it had been dug. Sangsang said, "I think it's a pity." Ning Kei said, "If the Buddha's chessboard were to be auctioned in Chang'an, it would definitely fetch a large sum of money. Who knows, it would be a pity to throw it away like this." Sangsang whispered, "That's not what I meant." Ning Kei said, "I remember that you like to play chess. I'll make a good one for you in the future. How about white jade?" Sangsang said, "It's a pity that a piece of the big black umbrella has been torn off." Ning Kei was startled and then laughed. Half a day later, dozens of Shenkong Temple ascetic monks held their poles and skied to the snow valley where the black horse carriage had stopped. Their monk robes fluttered like snowflakes dancing in the wind. Chi Mei, the president of the Hall of Respect of Shenkong Temple, stepped forward in silence. He looked at the Buddhist artifact that looked like a compass in his hand and the Buddha's finger relic inlaid on it. He frowned slightly. The Buddha's finger relic could guide believers to find the artifacts and relics he had left in the world. This was the real reason why the black horse carriage could not get rid of the pursuit. However, at this time, the Buddha's finger relic was unusually calm and did not move at all. It seemed that it could no longer sense the whereabouts of the chessboard. Chi Mei's expression was slightly solemn. He knew that the Buddhism sect had missed the best chance to kill the daughter of Yama. He secretly chanted the name of Buddha and silently prayed that this would not be the last chance. A few miles away, a withered tree in the snow that looked like a jade carving trembled in the wind, as if it was nodding. "I'm so sleepy that I immediately go to sleep. I hope that I can write it during the day tomorrow." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 6:14. In the depths of the western wilderness, a dusty scholar appeared at the edge of the giant sinkhole. He looked at the yellow temple in the middle of the giant sinkhole and asked, "Where is my youngest brother?" The scholar was the eldest brother of the academy. After the news that the black horse carriage had appeared in the Shenkong temple reached Chang, he once again embarked on his journey to find Ning Ke, even though he looked haggard and his state was gradually unstable. His voice was very soft. In the wilderness full of wind and snow, it could only spread a few feet before disappearing. However, someone in the yellow temple among the distant giant peaks clearly heard it. A calm and dignified voice slowly sounded in the air in front of the eldest senior brother. It was like a letter that had been opened and was calmly revealed to the people who wanted to read the letter. It was the voice of the chief preaching monk of the Shenkong temple. Ning Ke will naturally be where the daughter of Yama is. The eldest brother looked at the temple in the snow and mist and kept silent for a long time. He knew what the chief preaching monk meant, but he did not know how to answer, so he could only keep silent. The voice of the chief preaching monk once again sounded in front of him, like a wake-up bell. The human world is a human world. There are many hardships, but there are also many joys. Everyone has the responsibility and obligation to maintain the existence of this world. This is also the reason why the daughter of Yama cannot exist. Killing the daughter of Yama is not a matter of Buddhism and Taoism, but the will of the entire human world. Since Ning Ke wants to live and die with her, if the Academy wants to protect Ning Ke, it will go against the will of the entire human world. The Academy is the foundation of the Tang Empire. However, now even many people in the Tang Empire have begun to oppose the position of the Academy. How can you defeat the entire world? Can't the headmaster even understand this? The eldest brother covered his mouth and coughed painfully. His face was a little pale. More than 10 days ago, the West Hill Divine Palace officially announced the true identity of the daughter of Yama to the world, which directly led to the fiercest dispute in the Tang Empire for hundreds of years. The reason was the relationship between Ning Ke and the daughter of Yama. The Academy had not clearly expressed its attitude, so almost all officials and people questioned the Academy. The voice of the chief preaching monk of Shenkong Temple rose with the wind and snow on the edge of the sinkhole. It was full of pity and affirmation. Even if you know where Ning Ke is and find the black horse carriage, what can you do? Could you kill everyone in the world and bring the black horse carriage back to the Academy? You can't take them away and you can't stop people from looking at you. Even if you are the fastest person in the world, and even if the headmaster of the Academy personally takes action, it will be meaningless in the face of the omnipresent gazes and the invisible fear and hatred. They tore off the pieces of the black umbrella and buried the Buddha's chessboard. The ascetic monks scattered in the wilderness by Shenkong Temple could no longer track the black horse carriage as easily as they did a few days ago. The cavalry of the Right King's palace had lost the light of Buddha to guide the way, so it was difficult for them to organize an effective interception line. In the days that followed, the black carriage's escape went very smoothly. It was so peaceful and happy that it didn't seem like it was escaping, but more like a long journey across the wilderness. For ordinary people, the wilderness in autumn and winter was cold and desolate, and there was a serious lack of prey. If they left the team and acted alone, they would easily get lost or fall into a hopeless situation because of running out of supplies. But for Ning Ke and Sang Sang, this was the environment they were most familiar with and most liked. Just like when they were young in Min Mountain, they would rather deal with ferocious beasts and cruel nature than talk to the seemingly rough but actually cunning hunters in the hunting stockade. The boxwood bough buzzed from time to time, and the feather arrows pierced through the wind and snow and accurately shot the prey. That was a delicious pot of meat soup, or an attractive roast on the fire rack. Whether it was the snow rabbit that even the best hunters could hardly find, or the strong snow yak that even a small grassland tribe could not kill, they were all food that Ning Ke could easily obtain. Walking in the wilderness, Ning Ke and Sang Sang were like fish swimming in the stream, hunting, hiding, collecting snow and boiling water. Everything was so familiar, as if they were living a long time ago again. A horse neigh that tried hard to suppress its joy pierced through the wind and snow. The horse's hooves stepped on the snow and returned silently. Ning Ke jumped off the horse, holding a snow wolf that had been skinned. The big black horse touched the white cloth cover, and its exposed eyes were full of desire. Not long after, a pot of snow wolf soup was cooked, and the fragrance was tightly sealed inside the carriage. Outside the carriage, the big black horse was chewing the meat and shaking its head happily. Ning Ke filled a bowl with soup and put a few pieces of wolf meat in it, and handed it to Sang Sang. Sang Sang drank the soup and ate a piece of wolf meat. She said, "I have said that wolf meat is too coarse and not delicious." Ning Ke said, I walked around and didn't see anything else. Sang Sang said, if Tong Tong's little wolf knows that you eat wolf meat, it will hate you. Ning Ke said with a smile, even the big black wolf is not afraid of the little wolf, why should I care? Moreover, although they are both snow wolves, they are not relatives. Tong Tong's little snow wolf is a snowfield dire wolf, which is different from the ones we eat. Ning Ke ate half of the wolf meat soup and put the rest outside the carriage to freeze. Then he returned to the carriage to rest for a while. Seeing that Sang Sang was staring at the black chess piece in a daze, he asked, what are you thinking about? Sang Sang raised her head and looked at him. She said, I am thinking about what I said to you in the Hua Mountain Monastery. Ning Ke's expression changed slightly and he said, those last words? Sang Sang nodded. Ning Ke said, why are you thinking about those messy things? Now I have figured out that the cold aura in your body is not an illness, but a mark left by Yama. Naturally you will not die. Sang Sang looked down at the black chess piece in her palm and said, if the cold aura is the mark left by Yama in my body, then does the illness mean that the daughter of Yama has woken up? Ning Ke thought for a while and said, maybe it is. Sang Sang retracted her fingers and held the black chess piece tightly in her palm. After a long silence she said, if my illness breaks out again, what should I do? Will I die? Ning Ke held her in his arms and gently patted her back. He said, you are the daughter of Yama. How can you die? Sang Sang leaned against his chest and said in a trembling voice, but I am worried that the moment the daughter of Yama wakes up, I will be gone and so will Sang Sang. Ning Ke understood her words and hugged her tighter. He said, I don't know, but I think the headmaster must have other ways to cure your illness. Sang Sang looked up at him and asked, do you really trust the academy so much? Since the moment he killed people in the woodshed of the official of council's mansion, Ning Ke had never completely trusted anyone except Sang Sang, including the people in the city of Wei. He seemed to be casual but was actually suspicious. He looked gentle but was actually cold and heartless. Sang Sang knew what kind of person he was, so she could not understand why his trust in the academy had not been shaken until now. As I said, if this is the last trust, of course I will leave it to the headmaster. From a rational point of view, we should not trust anyone now, including the headmaster. But these years of studying and living in the academy have made me realize that it is tiring, hard and boring to be a rational person. Ning Ke looked at the wind and snow outside the window and said, especially now, the whole world has abandoned us. If we don't even trust the headmaster and senior brother, we will become more lonely. In the late autumn, the wind and snow in the wilderness gradually stopped. More and more herdsmen could be seen on the road and even a caravan could be seen. The further to the southeast of the wilderness, the more people there were. Everyone in the wilderness was a pair of eyes of the Shenkong temple. It became more and more difficult for Ning Ke to hide his whereabouts. During the day he could often see smoke signals and at night he could occasionally see fireworks. The shortest route from the West Wilderness to the Tang Empire was to enter the territory of the Golden Palace in the northeast, and then enter from the south. However, the ascetic monks of the Shenkong temple and the cavalry of the Right King's palace had already densely covered the wilderness in the northeast. Ning Ke even believed that the army of the Yueluan kingdom was waiting for him further away. Moreover, the northeast route was too dangerous. He knew better than anyone how powerful the cavalry of the Golden Palace was. The most troublesome thing was that between the Golden Palace and the West Wilderness, there was an unfreezing swamp that stretched for thousands of miles. It would be very risky to force his way through. These were not difficult tests for Ning Ke, because he had already changed his escape plan based on his speculation of the eldest brother's limitless state. He had been heading northeast for the past few days just to confuse the enemy. He did not know that the eldest brother had gone to the Shenkong temple to find him, and that he and Sang Sang were not alone. However, he was clear that if he wanted to get out of the current predicament, the best way was to let the eldest brother find him. He had no knowledge of the legendary limitless state. Even if he let his mind guess blindly, he would not be able to figure out how such a godly person could travel in the wind. However, since he insisted on trusting the academy and the eldest brother, he could speculate on the basis of trust and come to a conclusion. People in Chang and must have known that he and Sang Sang were in the western wilderness. Eldest brother didn't show up, probably because he couldn't confirm the specific location of him and Sang Sang. This also meant that the distanceless state wasn't just about freedom. It required a relatively accurate map in the consciousness and a fixed point. Therefore his target was the capital of the Yueluan kingdom. One day the sky was clear and boundless. What Ning Ke had been most worried about had finally happened. Sang Sang's little face turned a little pale. She began to cough. She did not cough up phlegm or blood. Instead, she coughed out cold air like the melting ice outside the carriage. Out of nowhere, a dark cloud floated over and hung in the sky above the black carriage. Sorry, there is only one chapter today. No other problems. I just re-examined the outline and found a lot of problems. I feel that the original plot content is not right and is too complicated. Therefore, I plan to revise it tonight and cut off all the branches and leaves. However, they are all meat that I can't bear to part with, so the process of cutting them off must be very painful. I don't have the energy to do anything else. After I revise and cut off the outline, the rest will be fine. Tomorrow is Saturday, but there will be more than 3 chapters. This week's rest day will be on Sunday because it is someone's birthday. Well, for us people in Ichang, this is the most important birthday of our lives. I wish everyone a happy weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 6:15. Oddly shaped clouds often appeared in the sky of the wilderness. Ning Ke did not see the cloud above the horse carriage. Even if he had seen it, he would not have paid much attention to it because such a scene was too common, and because his mind was completely focused on Sang Sang. Every time she coughed, he became more nervous. Thinking of what Master Chishan had said in the Lank Temple, he asked Sang Sang to continue chanting Buddhist scriptures and cultivating Dharma, hoping to temporarily stabilize the cold aura in her body. But he had a bad feeling. In the next few days, there were no cavalry from the palace or ascetic monks from the Shenkong Temple. The journey was peaceful, and Ning Ke finally noticed the cloud above the horse carriage. The sky was clear and blue, like washed porcelain. There were no clouds at all, but there was a lonely cloud hanging quietly above their heads. It was hard not to notice it. The sun was in the middle of the sky, covered by the cloud. Looking up from the ground of the wilderness, the edge of the cloud seemed to be embroidered with a golden edge. The cloud inside the golden edge was incomparably white, formed by countless extremely fine strands of cloud. It was like a big cotton candy, making people want to reach out and touch it. The lonely cloud covered the sun, casting a shadow of dozens of feet on the ground, which happened to cover the black horse carriage. Ning Ke found it interesting and did not think much about it. He put down the curtain and signaled the big black horse to continue forward. He did not notice that when the horse carriage moved on the ground of the wilderness, the lonely cloud in the sky moved with the carriage. The shadow also moved on the wilderness, always covering the black horse carriage. The big black horse believed in the philosophy of living in the present. Its eyes would always stay on the food in front of it, the road under its feet, and the area between the legs of the female horse. It was too lazy to look further, so it did not notice that it was always walking in the shadow. It only felt cool and comfortable. The wilderness in late autumn was very cold. Except for silly horses like the big black horse, no one would think that coolness was a pleasure. Ning Ke and Sang Sang in the carriage did not want to hear anything related to cold. The carriage was filled with coldness. There was a place beside the window that was not covered by silk, revealing the cast steel board. There was already a layer of frost on it. One could imagine how low the temperature in the carriage was. Sang Sang put on a pair of flannel pants, wrapped herself in a black fur coat and buried herself in the quilt. Even so, she did not feel warm at all. Her face was pale, her lips were blue, and there was frost on her eyelashes. Ning Ke added 2 pieces of fu paper into the brass brazier, took out a leather bag and put it in front of her face. Inside the leather bag was the hard liquor they had looted from a small tribe 10 days ago. Sang Sang shook her head, indicating that she would do it herself. She took the wine bag and poured the wine into her mouth. After a while, the wine bag gradually became flat. Perhaps because she drank too fast or because of her illness, Sang Sang put down the wineskin, frowned and coughed. The talisman fire in the brass brazier suddenly dimmed, and then gradually struggled to reignite. Just like the past few days, she did not cough up phlegm or blood. Every time she coughed out an extremely cold breath. The breath suddenly turned into white mist when it came into contact with the hot and humid air in the carriage. The cold aura in Sang Sang's body became heavier and heavier. Every day, some of it was expelled from her body as she coughed. The aura did not seem to belong to the human world. It was so cold that even the talisman fire could not withstand it. So the temperature in the carriage became lower and lower, which was why there was frost on the window. With a light cough, the temperature in the carriage gradually dropped. Ning Ke threw another fu paper into the brass brazier to barely keep it going. He had used too many fire talismans these days. The fu paper he had stored, especially the fire talisman, had long been used up. Now he was using one that he had written on the way, which consumed a lot of his psyche power. It made him look a little haggard. Using the heat from the outside could slightly neutralize the cold, but it could not eliminate the cold aura in Sang Sang's body. It could only treat the symptoms. Master Qishan had said when he treated Sang Sang in the Lank Temple that even if he cultivated in Buddhism and used Buddha's nature to suppress and calm the cold aura, it could only treat the symptoms but could not eradicate it. Ning Ke knew that if he wanted to completely eliminate the cold aura in Sang Sang's body and prevent Yama from seeing her, he could only hide in the world of Buddha's chessboard for the past 2 years. Sang Sang's coughing became more frequent and her condition became more and more troublesome. He became more and more anxious. It took a lot of effort to suppress the idea of turning back to the depths of the wilderness and digging out the chessboard that he had buried. The chessboard's aura of Buddha had completely disappeared and was no longer of any use. He struggled to maintain his rationality. He was even more determined to go to the capital of Yueluan Kingdom first. That Buddhist kingdom had the most Buddhist temples in the world. Even if he could not meet eldest brother for the time being, he could let Sang Sang read more Buddhist scriptures and find more Buddha's nature to temporarily calm the cold aura in her body. It would not be as dangerous as it was now. In late autumn, the cold wind in the wilderness gradually became stronger. After that snowfall, there was no more snow. Occasionally, snow clouds gathered in the sky, but they were instantly blown away by the strong wind. Only one cloud remained quietly in the sky, unaffected. The lonely cloud moved toward the southeast, casting a faint cloud shadow on the ground of the wilderness. The black horse carriage silently moved in the shadow, heading into the distance. The black horse carriage finally walked out of the wilderness and came to a border pass in the north of Yueluan Kingdom. At this time, the wilderness behind the horse carriage was already filled with cold wind and snow in winter. However, the world in front of the horse carriage was still in autumn. A few autumn trees in the border pass were bright red as if they were burning. Although he did not know the specific situation in Yueluan Kingdom, he could roughly guess. Ning Ke parked the black horse carriage in a call outside the border pass and went to gather information. After a while he returned to the call and walked into the carriage. Sang Sang looked at his expression and vaguely understood something. She smiled and said, "What do I look like in the portrait?" Ning Ke took out a piece of paper and unfolded it in front of her. He said, "Look at it yourself." When he entered the border pass earlier, he quickly confirmed the current situation. That was because the streets of the border town were filled with Sang Sang's wanted posters, and Sang Sang's identity was clearly written on them. The paper was still fresh. It should have been posted no more than 5 days ago. Sang Sang looked at the skinny handmaiden in the portrait and found that she really looked like her. She sincerely praised, "The painter of Yueluan Kingdom is really good." Even Sang Sang's slightly withered hair was drawn vividly in the portrait. Ning Ke pointed at a line of small words beside the handmaiden's cotton dress and said, "Of course the painter of West Hill Divine Palace is good." Sang Sang said helplessly, "So the Divine Hall also wants to catch me." Ning Ke smiled and said, "We both have acquaintances in the West Hill Divine Palace. If we are really going to be caught, why not let Yi Hongyu catch us? I think she will at least give us a quick death for the sake of our friendship. There is no need to burn us." Sang Sang said softly, "It's not funny." Ning Ke did not say anything else. He left the call on the big black horse and went around the border town, heading toward the hilly area in the east of Yueluan Kingdom. Sang Sang thought to herself, "Isn't the capital of Yueluan Kingdom in the south?" Even though she was confused, she trusted Ning Quebec. She was also a little tired, so she did not ask. A few days later, the black horse carriage arrived at the east of Yueluan Kingdom. Looking at the mountains from afar, Ning Ke stopped the big black horse when they were still far from the border. After passing through the mountains, they could see the land of the Tang Empire. Ning Ke had seen on the map that the residence of the Jinshi general of the Tang Empire should be more than 400 miles away in Zhezhou City. With the speed of the big black horse, it would only take him less than a day to see the Tang military flag that he had not seen for a long time, if no one stopped him. He knew very well that the route from the Yueluan Kingdom to the Tang Empire would definitely be filled with countless cultivators. That was why from the beginning, this route was not part of his plan. However, knowing was one thing. Seeing that his homeland was so close, how could he be satisfied if he did not personally take a look and confirm it? Don't force yourself. Let go if you feel tired. In the carriage, he looked at Sang Sang and said solemnly. Sang Sang nodded gently and took the broken big black umbrella from him. She reached out her right hand and held it tightly. Then she slowly closed her eyes and did not open the umbrella. A moment later, her small face became increasingly pale. Her slightly trembling eyelashes were like leaves on snow blown by the wind. Her right hand that was holding the umbrella also began to tremble. Her thin and weak body also began to tremble. Sang Sang suddenly coughed. Ning Ke did not hesitate to reach out and take the big black umbrella back from her hand. Then he held her in his arms and kept rubbing her back. After a long while her coughing stopped. Sang Sang put her head on his chest and closed her eyes. Her body was still trembling and her voice was tired and weak. She said, "There are many people, very powerful people." Ning Ke did not say anything and continued to hold her. After a while, Sang Sang opened her eyes and said in a low voice, "I don't dare to open the big black umbrella. I'm not in good health and can't see very clearly. You should let me watch for a while." Ning Ke said, "It's enough to know that there are people in front." Sang Sang said, "But I don't know where they are from." Ning Ke said, "The West Hill Divine Palace. No, I should say they are from Haoyan Taoism." He sat by the window and took out his binoculars to look at the mountains in the distance. He watched silently for a long time until the sky turned dark. Finally he saw several looming sword lights. Looking at the looming sword lights in the mountains in the night, Ning Ke remembered a story from many years ago. Murong Linshuang, the saintess of Devil's Doctrine, danced in Tiang City, and the sword lights crisscrossed the Min Mountain. Numerous Haoyan Taoism powerhouses came and forced Xiahou to cook his lover alive, regardless of the anger of the Tang Emperor. That was only the war between Haoyan Taoism and Devil's Doctrine. Now that Sang Sang was the daughter of Yama, it was the war between Haoyan and Yama. Ning Ke knew that the situation he was facing was definitely more dangerous than what Xiahou had faced. Yi Hongyu must have come. Did the great divine priest of revelation come? What about the hierarch lord? 8:00 in the evening YY 55373. Everyone come and chat. It's my birthday one day earlier. We mainly talk about the book. If you have time you are welcome to come and play. It won't be too long because I still have to write 2 chapters today. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 6:16. This was the world of Haoyan, and Haoyan Taoism was the most powerful force. Not to mention the West Hill Divine Palace, which gathered countless powerhouses, just the thousands of Taoist temples in the world. Who knew how much more power Haoyan Taoism had hidden? In the wilderness, the Shenkong Temple had sent more than 200 ascetic monks and several masters who were equivalent to knowing destiny state to chase the Black Horse carriage. It was already very powerful, but the West Hill Divine Palace was a truly terrifying ocean. From the moment the Divine Hall announced that Sang Sang was the daughter of Yama, the ocean began to brew a storm. The raging tide gradually rose from the calm sea, and it would not stop until the Black Horse carriage was completely smashed into pieces. Under the night sky, the mountains separated the Yueluan Kingdom and the Tang Kingdom. Yi Hongyu stood on the highest peak. Her divine robe danced in the wind, but there was no expression on her face. The divine robe of judgment was dark red, brighter than blood and darker than the night sky. No matter how sharp her eyesight was, she could not see the Black Horse carriage in the distance. But she kept looking in that direction as if she had seen something very interesting and refused to look away. Dozens of priests and knights from the West Temple were kneeling on the rocky peak in front of her. A deacon of the judicial department in black was reporting the information about the Yueluan Kingdom in a low voice. She looked indifferent as if she didn't care at all. It seemed that she was not nervous at all about something as important as killing the daughter of Yama. After a long time, Yi Hongyu withdrew her gaze and looked at the dozens of mountains around her. Hidden in those mountains were 400 papal knights of the West Hill Divine Palace, 3 grand cultivators of knowing destiny state, and more than 10 powerful rogue cultivators from Haoyan Taoism. They had also received the summons and were hiding in the mountains under her command. With such a powerful combination they could even occupy the capital of the Yueluan Kingdom, Chaoyang, overnight before the Buddhism sect could react. It was more than enough to deal with Ning Ke and the 6 Sang Sang. After the deacon of the judicial department finished his report, he still knelt on the ground, waiting for the great God's order. However, after waiting for a long time, he still didn't hear the voice that made him incomparably awestruck. He couldn't help but raise his head to look at the graceful figure on the cliff and asked respectfully, "Great God?" No one knew what Yi Hongyu was thinking about. She was lost in her thoughts and only woke up when she heard this. She looked to the west again and said with a smile, "That guy is more cunning than a thief." How could he not guess that Hao Yin Taoism would make arrangements here? I'm afraid he has already left. If that's the case, why should I wait here like an idiot? The black-robed executors were somewhat startled. From the words of the divine priest of judgment, it seemed that she was preparing to leave. However, the Taoist sect had set up an ambush in the Tsong Mountains. This was an order personally issued by the sect master. Who would dare to disobey? Yi Hongyu walked down the mountain. A deputy commander of the Divine Guard stood up in shock. He looked at the back of her robe fluttering in the wind and said, "Great God, this is an order from the hierarch. Where are you going?" In the Tsong Mountains in this world, there were very few people who were qualified to ask Yi Hongyu for an answer. Therefore she didn't answer. But when she walked past the deacon, she said, "I'm going to the quagmire." The deacon was her direct subordinate. She told him her whereabouts for the affairs of the Divine Hall of Judgment. This didn't mean that she needed to report her whereabouts to anyone else, even the hierarch. The people on the peak were stunned when they heard this. Even the deacon was shocked. He anxiously tried to dissuade her. The quagmire? The 1,000-mile swamp between the Yueluan Kingdom and the Golden Palace? Great God, it's too dangerous. No one has ever chosen that path for so many years. The path that no one has chosen is the path that Ning Ke will take. After saying this, Yi Hongyu floated away. Her ink-red robe fluttered on the mountain path. When it fluttered, it was like a bloody flag. When it fell, it was like the night sky. The people of the West Hill Divine Palace knelt on the peak to send her off. The capital city of the Yueluan Kingdom was called Chaoyang City. This name had been passed down for many years. No one knew whether it was Chaoyang or Chaoyang because both meanings seemed to be the same. There was a green mountain in the north of Chaoyang City. The mountain was rather slow, but it was wide and long. The mountain was covered with dense vegetation. Although there were many tourists, there were many secluded and uninhabited places. The southeast of the Yueluan Kingdom was connected to the Great River and the South Jin Kingdom by a primeval forest. The moisture from the Great Lake, the Great River, and the Southern Ocean were constantly blown into the kingdom by the wind. They were also sealed by the plateau in the west, the wilderness in the north, and the Tsong Mountains in the east. Therefore it was very warm and humid. It was late autumn, and the wilderness had already been snowing heavily. However, there was not the slightest cold or chilling aura around Chaoyang City. The mountains were covered with dense foliage and green, similar to the spring in Chang'an City. At noon, the sun hung high in the sky, spreading its heat to the ground. Chaoyang City and the Green Mountain in the north of the city became increasingly hot and stuffy. Everyone felt a little uncomfortable. Tourists and mountain people rested in the green forest, hiding from the slightly dry autumn sun. Some children played by the spring in the forest. Many dark-skinned ascetic monks sat cross-legged on the mountain path with relatively little shade. Some of the ascetic monks wore the robes of the White Tower Temple, while others came from other places. Their clothes were long tattered. Whether they were local or foreign ascetic monks, the copper bowls in front of them were filled with fruits and food. These fruits and food were naturally offerings from the people of the Yueluan Kingdom who worshipped Buddhism. There were hundreds of banyan trees in the depths of the Green Mountain. Under the trees were long grass and dense shrubs. It was difficult for humans and beasts to walk among them. It was very secluded. Looking at the rotten leaves on the ground, it seemed that no one had been here for decades. Ning Ke picked up the last handful of dead leaves and carefully scattered them evenly on the ground. After confirming that no traces were left behind and that even the intent of the array was perfectly hidden, he felt relieved. His right foot stepped on the thorny bushes and his body swept to the flat ground a few feet away. He began to give instructions to the big black horse. Normally, the big black horse would have been annoyed to see Ning Ke lecturing like a child. However, he listened very carefully today and his eyes were very focused. He did not miss a single word. "I don't know how long I will stay in Chaoyang City. If I find eldest brother, I will bring Sang Sang and him back first. Then I will ask eldest brother to come back and pick you up. If I can't find him, he will probably wait in the city. You can stay in the mountains for some time. Don't worry, I won't leave you alone. Thank you for your hard work, buddy." Ning Ke hugged the big black horse's neck and patted it gently. He then picked up a blue cloth bag and tied it around the big black horse's neck. Inside the bag were the few yellow fruits and ginseng and other food left in the carriage. The big black horse rubbed his face and neighed softly at Sang Sang under the tree. It turned around and walked slowly toward the deep mountains behind the dense forest. The blue cloth bag swayed gently. Watching the big black horse's figure disappear into the depths of the Green Mountain, Ning Ke walked back to the banyan tree and carried Sang Sang on his back. He tied them tightly with a strong rope and carried the heavy luggage to the city at the foot of the mountain. Everyone in the Yueluan kingdom, from the monarch to the peddlers, believed in the Buddhism sect and pursued the state of being aloof from worldly affairs. They were known for being low-key and peaceful. Although the Great River Kingdom, which had a feud with the Yueluan kingdom, would certainly not think so, at least within the Yueluan kingdom, there were very few cases of powerful ministers rebelling or shocking murders. It was because of this special philosophy or pursuit that many cities in the Yueluan kingdom did not have city walls, except for the Tang Empire and the Right King's palace. Even the capital, Chaoyang City, did not have city walls. They only built a simple bamboo fence in the direction of the Great Green Mountain to prevent beasts. Travelers who had been to Chaoyang City and Chang'an City always liked to compare the two cities. It was not because Chaoyang City was as magnificent as Chang'an City, but because Chaoyang City was at the other extreme. There were no city walls in Chaoyang City, so naturally there were no city gates. The soldiers in charge of collecting business taxes from the royal family placed a few tables and umbrellas on the official road to act as tax gates. Due to the warmth of the 4 seasons, the officials always looked lazy. Some of the soldiers even laid down their clothes and slept under the trees by the road. Everything looked so unruly. But what made the imperial court of the Yueluan kingdom proud was that Chaoyang City collected more taxes than Chang'an City every year. This was not because Chaoyang City was more developed than Chang'an City, nor was it because the tax officials were more diligent, nor was it because the citizens of the Yueluan kingdom had the self-awareness to pay taxes to share the burden of the kingdom. There was no secret to this. It was just that the tax collected by the Yueluan kingdom was 10 times that of the Tang Empire. Such an unruly country, such an inefficient and corrupt imperial court, such an open and chaotic capital, where they could not even defend against wild elephants that occasionally came out of the mountains to hunt for food, how could they defend against foreign enemies? If it were not for the mediation of the Buddhism sect, the Yueluan kingdom would have been destroyed by the cavalry of the Right King's palace 1,000 years ago. If it were not for the help of the West Hill Divine Palace, they might even have been defeated by the much weaker Great River Kingdom. Chaoyang City was an unguarded capital. Wind and rain could enter. Fortunately, its geographical location was superior. There had been no storms for many years and people could enter and leave at will. However, most of the people who cultivated in Buddhism were timid and few dared to try to sneak into the city to avoid the various heavy taxes imposed by the imperial court. One day in late autumn, a white cloud floated into Chaoyang City. No one paid attention to what was happening on the ground, so no one noticed the cloud in the sky. Only a tax officer was lying on the ground and basking in the sun. He looked at the white cloud in the sky, which was sharp on both ends and thick in the middle like a spindle. He smiled foolishly. Right under the white cloud, Ning Kai carried Sang Sang on his back and held a paper umbrella that he found somewhere. He successfully walked into Chaoyang City, his body covered with a very faint shadow. The air in Chaoyang City was filled with the smell of spices. Buddhist temples could be seen everywhere. The beautiful white pagodas above the temple walls and the small Buddhist shrines by the roadside were inlaid with many precious gems. Beggars holding broken bowls wandered casually, but no one looked at those gems and no one tried to pry one of them off. Sang Sang rested her head on Ning Kai's shoulder and looked at the scene in front of her. She was a little surprised and murmured, "It is indeed the legendary Buddhist land. Even the beggars are so virtuous." Ning Kai looked at an old beggar at the corner of the street, whose hands had been chopped off by a sharp weapon. He said, "There are only 2 possibilities. If beggars are so lazy and resigned to their fate, they are destined to be beggars for the rest of their lives. Or they know very well that even if they steal the gems, they will not be able to sell them and will be punished terribly. Try to finish the 3rd chapter before midnight. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.